She slammed the telegram down on the kitchen table so hard the coffee cups rattled. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from something worse. From the particular bone-deep humiliation of being told once again that she was not enough. The message was only 11 words long. Your services are no longer required. Do not return to this property. 11 words, 8 years of her life, and they gave her 11 words. Maggie Dawson pressed both palms flat against the table and breathed. Outside, the Wyoming summer was already burning white and merciless. She could hear the Hargrove household moving upstairs, the clink of fine china, the rustle of expensive fabric, the particular laughter of people who had never once worried about where their next meal was coming from. People she had fed every single morning for 8 years. People who had called her cooking extraordinary, her biscuits the best in the territory, her pies something approaching miraculous, right up until the moment their cousin arrived from Charleston and declared that employing a woman of Maggie's size was an embarrassment to the family name. She had not been dismissed for her work. She had been dismissed for her body. Maggie picked up the telegram, folded it once, and slid it into the pocket of her apron. Then she walked to the pantry, retrieved her grandmother's recipe book from its hiding place behind the flour sacks, and set it gently on the table beside her only traveling bag. She was 32 years old. She had nowhere to go. She had $11.40 a change of clothes and a handwritten book of recipes that her grandmother had pressed into her hands on her deathbed and said, "Maggie girl, this is your inheritance. Don't you let anybody tell you it ain't worth something." She had believed her grandmother. She had spent her entire adult life believing that her worth was in what she created, what she offered, what she gave. But the world kept disagreeing. And now, standing in the kitchen of a house that had never truly been her home, Maggie Dawson made herself a promise. She said it out loud quietly to nobody but the empty room, and whatever God might be listening through the open window. "I will not beg," she said, "not one more time." Before we go any further, if this story is already speaking to you, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's get back to Maggie, because what happens next changes everything. The posting at Silver Creek Ranch had been pinned to the board outside the Millhaven General Store for 11 days before Maggie found it. She found it by accident, or maybe by providence, depending on how a person felt about such things. She had come to the store to inquire about laundry work, which was the lowest paying and hardest work available to a woman alone, and she had already steeled herself to accept it. She needed income. She needed shelter. She was not in a position to be proud, but the posting stopped her cold. Wanted cook for Silver Creek Ranch. Must be experienced. Must be able to feed 40 men 3 meals daily. Position includes room board and fair wage. Apply directly to foreman Mr. Joel Briggs. 40 men. 3 meals daily. Maggie's heart did something unexpected. It lifted. She had cooked for large numbers before the Hargroves ran a household of 14, including staff, and she had managed their holiday gatherings when the count rose to 30. But 40 working ranch hands 3 times a day, that was a different kind of challenge. That was a kitchen that never slept. That was a woman who had to know what she was doing down to her bones, who had to be fast and efficient and creative and tireless. Maggie knew she was that woman. The question was whether anyone else would give her the chance to prove it. She had heard of Silver Creek Ranch. Everybody in the territory had heard of Silver Creek Ranch. It belonged to Ethan Callahan, one of the wealthiest men in Wyoming, a man who had built his empire acre by acre from inherited land and iron-willed determination. People spoke of him with a particular mixture of respect and wariness. He was not cruel from what anyone said, but he was cold. He had been cold for years, ever since he lost his wife and child in '78, and the coldness had set into him like a winter that forgot to end. The kitchen at Silver Creek had gone through 4 cooks in 3 years. Nobody stayed. The rumors were varied. Some said the work was too hard. Some said the men were too rough. Some said the ranch had a sorrowful feeling to it that made a person want to leave before it settled into their own chest. Maggie read the posting one more time. Then she took it off the board and put it in her pocket alongside the telegram. She figured a sorrowful place and a woman who had spent her whole life being told she didn't belong might just understand each other. Joel Briggs was a lean, sun-dried man, somewhere between 50 and 100 years old, with the squinted eyes of someone who had spent decades measuring distances and finding them wanting. He was standing by the corral fence when Maggie arrived at Silver Creek, and he looked her over the way a person looks at something they are not entirely sure is real. She had borrowed a wagon seat from the liveryman in exchange for mending his family's winter coats, a negotiation she had conducted with quiet dignity and completed with total competence. She arrived at the ranch gate sitting straight-backed, her traveling bag between her feet and her grandmother's recipe book on her lap. She had dressed carefully that morning, her best dress, her hair pinned clean and proper. She looked like what she was, a professional woman applying for professional work. Briggs still hesitated. He looked at her once, looked away, looked back. "You're here about the cook position," he said. It was not quite a question. "I am," Maggie said. "You aware of what the position involves? 40 men. Dawn breakfast by 5, midday meal brought to the range, supper by 6, 7 days a week during cattle season, 6 during the slow months." "I'm aware." He shifted his weight. "We've had some trouble keeping a cook. It's a working ranch. It ain't a social situation." "I'm not looking for a social situation," Maggie said. "I'm looking for work." Briggs rubbed the back of his neck. She could see him working through something, weighing something. She had been weighed like this before. She knew exactly what was on the other side of the scale: her appearance, her size, the particular arithmetic that small-minded people performed when they looked at a large woman and decided what she was and wasn't capable of. She let him finish his arithmetic. Then she said very calmly, "Mr. Briggs, I have cooked for large households for over a decade. I can make bread, biscuits, roasted meats, stews, soups, pies, and preserves. I can work within a budget, manage a pantry, and reduce waste. I have never once failed to have a meal ready on time." She paused. "If it helps you make your decision, I will tell you something my grandmother told me. She said hunger does not care what someone looks like, and neither do the men who've been working since before sunrise." Something moved in Briggs's expression. A shift, small but real. "You can cook a trial meal," he said. "Tomorrow morning. You impress the men, the job's yours." "I'll need access to the kitchen tonight to assess the supplies," Maggie said. Briggs blinked. "Tonight? If I'm cooking breakfast for 40 men at 5 in the morning, I need to know what I'm working with before I sleep," she said. "That's not a request, Mr. Briggs. That's how a professional operates." Another pause. Then for just a moment Joel Briggs almost smiled. "Come on then," he said. "I'll show you the kitchen." The Silver Creek kitchen was a disaster, not in the way of neglect exactly. It had been cleaned more or less, but in the way of a room that had lost its purpose. The shelves were organized without logic. The pots were stacked in configurations that made no practical sense. The pantry held supplies that had been purchased without a plan, some things in excess, critical things missing entirely. The stove, which was a good stove, a solid iron range that could have been a magnificent tool, was cold and sitting in a posture of pure abandonment. Maggie walked through the kitchen slowly, touching nothing, yet just looking, taking inventory, not just of supplies, but of what the room was telling her. It told her nobody in this kitchen had cooked with love in a very long time. There was competence in the bones of the room. Good tools, decent space, a proper water pump, 2 windows that would let in the morning light. But the heart of it was gone. The warmth, the intention. Whoever had been cooking here before had been cooking out of obligation alone, and the room had absorbed that energy and turned gray with it. Maggie set her grandmother's recipe book on the main work table. She laid her hand flat on the cover. Then she got to work. She was in that kitchen until nearly midnight, reorganizing, taking inventory, planning 3 days of menus in her head, identifying what she could make from what was available and what she would need Briggs to source from town before the end of the week. She found good flour, decent lard, dried beans, salt pork, And in the very back of the pantry, half hidden behind a bag of cornmeal, a jar of preserved blackberries that someone had put up the previous summer and apparently forgotten. She set the jar on the counter and looked at it for a long moment. Then she made a decision that she didn't entirely understand until much later. She would make a pie. Not for the trial meal that would be biscuits and eggs and salt pork and strong coffee, the right food for working men at 5 in the morning. The pie would come later. The pie was for something else, something she couldn't name yet, something that felt like it was waiting to be known. The trial breakfast went the way Maggie knew it would go. She was at the stove by 4:15, alone in the kitchen, in the blue, dark quiet before dawn, moving with the calm efficiency of a woman who had done this so many times that her body knew the rhythm without being told. Biscuits in the oven by 4:30. Salt pork on the griddle. Eggs cracked and waiting. Coffee boiling strong enough to wake the dead. By 5 o'clock, the kitchen smelled like something worth getting out of bed for. The ranch hands came in the way men always do, shuffling half awake, barely speaking, and they stopped just inside the door, the way men always do when something smells better than they expected. Nobody said anything at first. They just sat down and ate. That was all Maggie needed to see. When a person eats in silence, it's one of two things. Either the food is bad, and they're enduring it, or the food is good, and they don't have the words for it. She had learned to tell the difference by watching hands. Hands that moved slowly pushing food around were enduring. Hands that moved steadily, purposefully, returning to the plate again and again without pause were grateful. 40 pairs of hands moved steadily that morning. A man toward the end of the table, young with a sunburned neck and an earnest face, looked up from his plate and said, "Ma'am, are these sourdough biscuits?" "They are," Maggie said. He looked back down at his biscuit with what could only be described as reverence. "My mother made sourdough," he said quietly. Maggie said nothing. She just refilled his coffee. After the men cleared out and headed to the range, Joel Briggs came into the kitchen alone. He stood for a moment in the doorway, and his expression was doing something complicated. "The position's yours," he said. "Thank you," Maggie said. "I'll need to let Mr. Callahan know." "Of course." Briggs nodded slowly. "He don't come to meals much," he said. "Takes a plate in his office most nights, just so you're prepared." Maggie absorbed this. "I appreciate the warning." "Ain't a warning exactly," Briggs said. "Just a fact. He stopped, started again. "He lost somebody years back. His wife and his boy. He's been—" Another stop. "He functions," Briggs finally said. "He functions just fine. He's just not, he ain't present. You understand?" "I understand," Maggie said. And she did understand. She understood it in the particular way that lonely people recognize loneliness in other people, not because the signs are dramatic, but because they are quietly, persistently, unmistakably familiar. So, she settled into Silver Creek Ranch the way water settles into dry ground without announcement, without ceremony, simply by filling the spaces that were empty. Her room was small and plain, and suited her perfectly. A narrow bed, a washstand, a window that looked out toward the eastern pastures. She unpacked her traveling bag with care, hung her dresses on the hooks behind the door, and placed her grandmother's recipe book on the windowsill where the morning light would find it. She began her first full week with a methodical plan. Day 1, she fixed the pantry properly, establishing a logical order that anyone could follow. Day 2, she repaired the schedule, working out a rhythm for the 3 daily meals that gave her adequate preparation time and reduced the chaos of the rush. Day 3, she spoke to Briggs about supply needs and presented him with a written list organized by priority with estimated costs alongside each item. Briggs looked at the list for a long moment. "You write a clear hand," he said. "My grandmother insisted on it," Maggie said. "What else did your grandmother insist on?" "That a person should know the value of their own work," Maggie said. "And never let anyone talk them out of it." Briggs folded the list and put it in his shirt pocket. "I'll get this to town by Friday," he said. Within 2 weeks, the change in the ranch hands was visible to anyone paying attention. They were steadier, calmer. They argued less. They worked with more focus. The midday meal that Maggie sent out to the range, hearty, hot, properly seasoned, gave them the kind of sustained energy that the previous arrangements had not. A man who is properly fed is a different creature from a man who is merely full. The evening meals became something the hands looked forward to. Maggie varied them, rotating through her grandmother's recipes, with the care of someone who understood that monotony kills morale. She paid attention to what the men favored and adjusted accordingly. She learned their names, all 40 of them, within the first week, and she used their names when she spoke to them, which was a small thing that turned out not to be small at all. A man named Curtis, who was somewhere in his 60s and had worked the range for most of his adult life, came into the kitchen one evening and said, "Ma'am, I ain't eaten like this since I left my mother's house in Tennessee 40 years ago." Maggie said, "Sit down, Curtis. I'll cut you an extra piece of cornbread." He sat down and ate his cornbread with the careful gratitude of a man who had not been offered kindness in a very long time. And Maggie went on cooking, because that was what she did. She cooked, and in cooking she gave people something they were hungry for that had nothing to do with food. She saw Ethan Callahan for the first time at the end of her second week. She was in the yard early one morning, earlier than the kitchen required her, just before true dawn, taking a few minutes of stillness before the work began. It was a habit she had cultivated over years, a brief quiet moment alone before the demands of the day arrived. She stood at the edge of the yard with a cup of coffee and looked out at the eastern sky, which was doing the extraordinary thing it does in Wyoming in early summer, laying down colors that seem impossible from ground level. She heard boots on the porch behind her and did not turn. A man came to stand some distance away, not close enough to intrude, just present. He had a cup of coffee too. She could see that in her peripheral vision. He stood with the particular stillness of someone who is accustomed to standing alone. They were quiet for several minutes. Then the man said without preamble, "You're the new cook." "I am," Maggie said. "Margaret Dawson, Maggie." "Ethan Callahan." She turned to look at him then, because a person should look at someone when they're speaking, and because she was curious in spite of herself. He was taller than she'd expected, with the lean, weathered build of a man who had done physical work his whole life. His face was not young, but not old, somewhere in his early 40s. She guessed, though the lines around his eyes were the kind that come from grief as much as from years. He was looking at the horizon, not at her. "Briggs says the men are eating well," Ethan said. "They're eating properly," Maggie said. "There's a difference. Eating well is about pleasure. Eating properly is about sustenance. Both matter, but sustenance is what keeps a person standing." Ethan looked at her then, a brief look, assessing not unkind. "Which do you think is more important?" he asked. Maggie considered this seriously, the way she considered most things. "I think a person who only ever eats to survive eventually forgets they're alive," she said. "So eventually you need both." Another silence. The sky was shifting now, going from purple to gold at the edges. "Your biscuits have been good," Ethan said finally. "Thank you," Maggie said. He nodded once, a small, contained acknowledgement, and then he turned and went back inside. And Maggie stood there with her coffee and watched the sun come up over the eastern pastures of Silver Creek Ranch, and she thought, that is a man who is very tired of only surviving. She understood that too. The pie happened on a Thursday 3.5 weeks into her time at the ranch. It was an ordinary evening, the supper rush done, the hands settled in their bunkhouse, the kitchen cleaned and quiet. Maggie was working through a batch of bread dough for the morning, her hands moving through the familiar motions, her grandmother's recipe book open on the counter, though she didn't need it for bread. She kept the book open out of habit, out of something like company. She had been thinking about the blackberry preserves for days. She couldn't say exactly why. There was something about that jar sitting in the back of the pantry forgotten and waiting. Something about it pulled at her in a way she didn't fully understand. It felt important. It felt like it was trying to tell her something. She finished the bread dough, covered it, and went to the pantry. She came back with the jar of blackberries. She made a crust the way her grandmother had taught her, with cold lard, cold water, a patient hand, and no hurrying. The crust was not a thing to be rushed. Her grandmother had been very clear about this. The crust tells a person whether you respect the work or you're just trying to get through it. Maggie girl, don't ever just try to get through it. She rolled the crust out and laid it in the pie tin with the careful attention of someone performing a small ceremony. She mixed the blackberry filling, the preserved berries, a little sugar, a pinch of cinnamon, a breath of vanilla, and poured it in. She latticed the top crust with strips she cut by hand, and she crimped the edges the way she had been shown 1,000 times, the specific pinch and fold that was her grandmother's signature. She slid the pie into the oven and went back to her bread. The kitchen filled with a smell that Maggie could only describe as the smell of being loved. That particular warm sweetness of blackberry and butter and crust, that smell that was connected in her memory to her grandmother's kitchen, to Sunday afternoons, to the feeling of being safe in a world that otherwise felt uncertain and large. It was a powerful smell. It was the kind of smell that reached into a person's chest and did something there without asking permission. She was just pulling the pie from the oven when she heard boots in the hallway. She set the pie on the cooling rack and turned. Ethan Callahan stood in the kitchen doorway. He looked like a man who had come somewhere without quite knowing why, the look of someone who had followed a smell the way you follow a sound in the dark, half instinct and half confusion. His eyes went to the pie. He stood very still. Maggie watched his face do something that she did not entirely understand, but recognized as significant. Something moved across it, not emotion exactly, or not just emotion. Something older and deeper than that, something buried coming briefly to the surface. "Smelled it from my office," he said. His voice was careful, neutral on the outside. "Blackberry," Maggie said. "From the preserves in the pantry. I hope you don't mind, they'd been there since last summer by the look of them." "I don't mind," he said, still looking at the pie. "It needs to cool for a bit," Maggie said, "but I can cut you a slice when it's ready." He didn't answer right away. He was still looking at the pie with that expression she couldn't quite name. "My wife used to make blackberry pie," he said. The words were quiet, almost inaudible. He said them the way a person says something they have been not saying for a very long time, something that comes out sideways, unexpected, even to themselves. Maggie didn't say anything. She had learned, she had been taught mostly by loss, mostly by her own loneliness, that some things didn't need a response. Some things needed a witness. Just someone to be present while the feeling moved through. She cut 2 slices, put them on the plain white plates the ranch used for everything. Slid one across the work table toward the empty stool on the other side. She sat down on her own stool, picked up her fork, and took a bite. After a moment, Ethan came into the kitchen. He sat down on the stool across from her. He looked at the pie for another long moment. Then he picked up his fork and tasted it. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that has weight to it. Maggie watched without watching as something happened to Ethan Callahan's face. The neutrality fell. Just for a moment, a few seconds, no more. The careful blankness that he wore like armor came loose. His jaw tightened. His hand, the one holding the fork, went completely still. His eyes, which had been focused on the plate, went somewhere else entirely, somewhere internal and old and full of things she would never know. When he looked up, his eyes were bright. Not tears, or not yet. Something that was just before tears balanced at the edge. He put his fork down. "Where did you learn to make this?" he asked. His voice was not quite steady. "My grandmother," Maggie said. She had a recipe she'd carried since her own mother's time. She taught me everything she knew, but this was... Maggie paused, finding the words. This was the one she saved for the hardest days. The days when something needed healing that couldn't be healed with medicine, or time, or words. She looked at the pie. She used to say food isn't just for the body. It's for the places inside a person that don't have names. The places that get hungry in ways that have nothing to do with eating. Ethan said nothing for a long moment. Then, "She sounds like a wise woman." She was the wisest person I've ever known. Maggie said. Another silence, but it was different from the silences they'd had before. It was the silence of two people who have arrived somewhere they didn't plan to arrive at, who are standing in a place they recognize without ever having been there. She would have liked this ranch, Maggie said. Not because it was a comforting thing to say, but because it was true. Her grandmother had loved open country and hard-working people, and the particular beauty of a place that was earning its own existence. Everybody leaves this ranch, Ethan said. It was not self-pity. It was a statement of fact. The flattest kind of fact, the kind delivered by someone who has observed something so many times, it no longer surprises them. I'm not everybody, Maggie said. He looked at her, a long, real look, the kind he hadn't given her before, not assessing, not careful, just looking. No, he said slowly. I reckon you ain't. He picked up his fork and finished the pie. And Maggie sat across from him in the warm kitchen and drank her coffee, and she thought something happened just now, something that doesn't have a name yet. But it was real. She was certain of that. Whatever it was entirely, undeniably real.
Ban Chime.
The weeks that followed were not dramatic in the way that people sometimes imagine transformation is dramatic, sudden and loud and obvious. They were quiet, incremental, the kind of change that only becomes visible in retrospect, like the way you don't notice the days getting longer until suddenly the sky is still light at 8 o'clock. Ethan began coming to supper. Not every night, not even most nights at first, but he started appearing in the dining room, the room off the kitchen that the ranch hands used, which was not the formal dining room that had clearly not been used in years, and sitting at the end of the long table and eating. Not talking much, but present. The men noticed. Curtis told Maggie one morning that in 3 years he had never once seen the boss eat with the crew. He used to, Curtis said. Before. He used to eat with everybody. He was different before. What was he like before? Maggie asked. She was slicing bread and keeping her attention on the blade, giving Curtis the space to speak without the pressure of being looked at. Easier, Curtis said. He laughed more. He was, I don't know how to say it right. He was here. You understand? He looked at things. Now he looks through things. He paused. He looked at you, though. Last night at supper. He actually looked at you. Maggie said nothing, but she filed it away in the part of herself that kept careful track of things that mattered. She made the blackberry pie again the following Sunday, and she set it on the sideboard in the dining room without comment, and by the time supper was finished, it was gone entirely. She didn't know who had eaten it, and she didn't ask. The Sunday after that, 3 of the hands offered to pick fresh berries from the creek bank if she wanted them. You don't have to do that, Maggie said. We want to, said the young one with the sunburned neck. His name was Thomas, she'd learned, and he was 19 years old and far from home, and trying very hard to be a man about it. It's the best thing I've eaten since I can remember, ma'am. We'd like to have it again is all. She looked at Thomas for a moment, at his earnest, sunburned face and his trying hard eyes, and she thought this. This is what cooking is for. Not the compliment, not the recognition, but the fact that this young man who is 1,000 miles from his mother and working harder than his body is ready for has something to look forward to on a Sunday. All right, she said. Bring me the berries. Joe. She had been at Silver Creek for 6 weeks when the trouble started. It arrived in the form of a man named Charles Whitmore, who rode through the ranch gate on a Tuesday afternoon with 2 of his men behind him, and the particular air of someone who was accustomed to arriving places and finding them already arranged to his satisfaction. Maggie saw him from the kitchen window. She didn't know who he was yet, but she had spent enough of her life reading people quickly to know this was a man who saw the world as a series of transactions, and who had never once, in his comfortable and advantaged life, had anyone decline to transact with him. She went back to her bread. She heard the conversation in the yard too far to make out words, but the shape of it was clear from tone alone. Whitmore spoke with the smooth confidence of someone presenting an offer he considers unarguable. Ethan responded with the careful brevity of someone who does not want to be having this conversation. Briggs stood to the side and said nothing. After 20 minutes, Whitmore left. Ethan came into the kitchen. He didn't say anything for a moment. He stood with his hands in his pockets, looking at nothing in particular. "Whitmore's been after me to partner with him for 2 years," he said finally. Maggie continued working. "Doesn't seem like a man who takes no for an answer." "He ain't." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "He's got a daughter, Clara. Good woman by all accounts. He wants an arrangement." Maggie's hands moved steadily through the bread dough. She did not look up. "What kind of arrangement?" she asked. "The kind that involves a wedding," Ethan said, "and a land merger, and a business agreement that would solve my drought problem and his expansion problem in one transaction." The kitchen was very quiet. "That sounds practical," Maggie said. "It is practical," Ethan said. "Practical is exactly what it is." She looked up then. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Something searching in it, something that felt like he was asking a question he didn't know how to say out loud. "Is practical what you want?" she asked. The question landed between them. Ethan was quiet for a long time. "I don't know what I want," he said. "I stopped asking that question about 8 years ago." Maggie looked at him steadily. "That's a long time to stop asking." He met her eyes. "Yes," he said. "It is." He left the kitchen without another word. And Maggie went back to her bread and thought, this man is standing at a crossroads, and he doesn't know it yet. And whoever helps him see which road is really in front of him is going to determine what becomes of the rest of his life. She kneaded the dough with both hands and thought about that. She thought about it for a long, careful, serious time. The town started talking on a Friday. She heard it first from a woman who came to the ranch to deliver sewing supplies to the bunkhouse, a talkative woman named Mrs. Fitch, who had no particular malice in her, but an extraordinary appetite for information, and absolutely no discretion about its distribution. Mrs. Fitch came into the kitchen to say hello and ended up staying 45 minutes, and in that 45 minutes, she conveyed with the energy of someone delivering news they consider both scandalous and absolutely essential that the town of Millhaven had been discussing Maggie Dawson with considerable enthusiasm. The specific nature of the discussion was not complimentary. "People are saying," Mrs. Fitch said, lowering her voice as if the kitchen walls had ears, "that you've gotten yourself comfortable with Mr. Callahan, that a woman in your—" She paused, searching for words. "In your situation ought to know better than to put ideas in her head." Maggie listened to this without expression. "What situation would that be?" she asked calmly. Mrs. Fitch looked at her. The look communicated clearly what the words had left tactfully unspoken. Maggie understood. Her situation was the size of her body. Her situation was the way she looked. Her situation was the arithmetic that the town of Millhaven had performed and arrived at a large plain. Penniless woman had found herself in the household of a wealthy widower, and clearly, she was attempting to elevate herself through means that were embarrassing to witness. "I see," Maggie said. "I'm just telling you what's being said," Mrs. Fitch said, with the particular helplessness of someone who has thoroughly enjoyed delivering information they are now claiming they did not enjoy delivering. "I appreciate you letting me know," Maggie said. After Mrs. Fitch left, Maggie stood at the kitchen window for a long moment. The eastern pastures stretched out green and vast in the afternoon light. A hawk was riding the thermals somewhere to the south, making great slow circles without effort. The mountains in the far distance were going blue in the haze. She had been here before. She had been told in 1,000 different ways over the course of her life that she was attempting something she had no right to attempt, that the simple act of being competent, present, and valued was a kind of overreach for a woman like her, that she should know better, that she should remember her place. She breathed. She had made herself a promise on the morning she left the Hargrove house. She would not beg. Not one more time. The alternative to begging was not argument, it was not defense, it was not anger. though anger was there, honest and deep and fully justified. The alternative to begging was action. It was the continued stubborn, undefeatable act of showing up and doing the work and letting the work speak for itself. She straightened her shoulders. She went back to the stove. She had 40 men to feed. 3 days after Mrs. Fitch's visit, Ethan came to find her. Not in the kitchen in the yard where she was hanging the morning's laundry in the early light, her hands moving efficiently through the wet fabric, her mind running through the week's menu. He walked toward her with the particular purposefulness of a man who has made a decision. "I heard what's being said in town," he said. "Maggie did not stop hanging laundry." "I assumed you would. Maggie." His voice was quiet, but it had something in it, not anger exactly, but something adjacent to it, something protective. She looked at him. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have. The way people are talking about you is not right. It's not fair and it's not true, and I should have said so to Whitmore's face when he mentioned it." She looked at him steadily. "Whitmore mentioned it." Ethan's jaw tightened. "He came to tell me that having a woman like you in the house was—" He stopped, started again. He was not kind in how he said it. "What did you tell him?" "I told him," Ethan said carefully, "that the quality of work done on my ranch is none of his business, and that the character of the people I employ is none of his business, and that he should restrict his opinions to matters within his own property lines." Maggie was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "I should have said more," Ethan said. "I should have—" He stopped again. His hands were by his sides, not quite still. "The things he said about you. The way he said them. It wasn't right, Maggie. A person who works the way you work, who gives the way you give, they deserve to be spoken of with respect." She looked at him for a long moment in the morning light. She thought, he means this. He is not saying it to be gallant. He is saying it because it is a thing he believes with his whole chest. "I've been spoken of that way my whole life," she said quietly. "It hurts the same every time, but it doesn't change what I know about myself." "What do you know about yourself?" he asked. She looked out at the pastures, then back at him. "That my worth is in my work," she said, "and in what I give, and in what I choose to be regardless of what anybody else decides I am." She paused. "I learned that from my grandmother. She was right about most things." Ethan looked at her with that expression she had been seeing more and more often, the real one, the one beneath the armor. "She raised somebody extraordinary," he said. It was simple, direct. It landed with the clean precision of something entirely true. Maggie felt it reach somewhere inside her that did not usually get reached. "Thank you, Ethan," she said. She went back to the laundry. But something had shifted. Something small and enormous had shifted, and both of them felt it, and neither of them quite knew what to do with it yet. But it was there. It was absolutely entirely there. The shift happened the way most important things happen, not all at once, but in pieces, small and accumulating, until the weight of them could no longer be ignored. The morning after Ethan spoke to her in the yard, Maggie arrived in the kitchen to find a crate of fresh supplies on the work table. Not the standard weekly order. Something extra good sugar, real vanilla extract, a tin of cinnamon, 2 pounds of dried cherries, and a bolt of fresh cheesecloth. There was no note. There didn't need to be. She stood at the work table with her hands on the edge of the crate and was quiet for a moment. Then she put the supplies away and started breakfast. But she did not forget the crate. She filed it in the same careful place she filed everything important, the part of herself that kept track of what people showed her when they stopped performing and just acted. Actions were the only honest thing. Words were easy. Words cost nothing. A man who talked about respect and then quietly, without announcement, made sure you had the tools to do your work properly. That was a man who meant what he said. She had met very few of those. The days settled into a rhythm that felt, for the first time in as long as Maggie could remember, like something she had actually chosen. She was up before the sun, and she worked until the kitchen was clean after supper, and in between, she did the work she had been born to do, not just cooking but caring. Feeding 40 men 3 times a day was logistics. What she was actually doing was something older and more essential than logistics. She was holding a community together with food, the way women had always held communities together quietly, consistently, without credit, without ceasing. The men responded to it in the way people respond to being genuinely cared for, which is to say, they became better versions of themselves. They were less rough with each other. They said, "Thank you more." Thomas, the young one with the sunburned neck, started helping clear the supper table without being asked. Curtis began organizing the supply deliveries in a way that made Maggie's mornings easier. A gruff man named Henderson, who had barely spoken a word in the first 3 weeks, began leaving small things on the kitchen windowsill. A handful of wildflowers, once a smooth river stone with an interesting shape. Another time, things that had no practical value, but communicated something he clearly had no words for. Maggie accepted each offering with the same quiet dignity. She never made a production of it. She just acknowledged it with a nod or a word and moved on, and the men seemed to understand that this was enough, that being seen briefly and genuinely was enough. Ethan watched all of this. She caught him watching sometimes, standing at the edge of the dining room doorway after supper, or pausing near the kitchen when he passed through the yard. Never intruding. Never making himself part of what was happening. Just observing, with an expression that she had started to be able to read. It was the expression of a man who was hungry for something he had convinced himself he no longer had the right to want. She did not press him. She had learned hard early in ways that left marks that a person who has locked themselves away from something painful cannot be forced back toward it. They have to find their own way. They have to want it badly enough to take the first step themselves. Forcing it only caused them to retreat further. All you could do was make the space safe enough that the first step didn't feel like destruction. She made the space safe. She kept cooking. She made the blackberry pie every Sunday, and she set it on the sideboard without ceremony, and every Sunday it disappeared completely, and she never mentioned it, and neither did Ethan. But the following Thursday, he came into the kitchen at 9 in the evening, and stood in the doorway and said without preamble, "Do you have any of that pie left from Sunday?" "No," Maggie said. It was gone by Monday noon. He was quiet for a moment. "Could you make another one?" She looked at him. There was something almost painful about the directness of the question. Something unguarded in it, like a man asking for something he isn't sure he's allowed to ask for. "Thomas brought me fresh berries from the creek yesterday," she said. "I can have a pie in an hour." He sat down at the work table without being invited, and she made the pie, and they ate it together in the kitchen at 10 o'clock at night with coffee, and they talked. Not about anything significant. Not at first. He asked about her grandmother, and she told him the small house in Missouri, the enormous garden, the way her grandmother could diagnose what was wrong with a person's spirit by watching how they ate. He told her briefly and carefully about growing up on land that had been his family's for 2 generations, about learning to read weather before he learned to read words, about the particular education of the open country. It was the most Maggie had heard him say in 6 weeks combined. She did not remark on this. She just listened and responded and let the conversation be what it was. 2 people in a warm kitchen late at night, talking the way people talk when they're no longer pretending to be less than themselves. When he left, he paused in the doorway. "Maggie," he said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, as if he was deciding whether to say the thing he was about to say. "Thank you," he said. "For..." Another pause. "For staying." She met his eyes. "I told you," she said. "I'm not everybody." The corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile. Then he was gone. And Maggie sat alone in the kitchen with the empty plates and the last of the coffee, and the particular warm silence of a house that was slowly, carefully, reluctantly allowing itself to remember what it felt like to be alive. She thought something is changing here. She thought I need to be careful, but she also thought in the honest part of herself that did not traffic in caution. Something is changing here, and it doesn't feel like danger. It feels like something growing toward the light. The trouble with Charles Whitmore was not that he was a bad man in the simple, obvious way. It would have been easier if he were. Bad men in the simple, obvious way are easy to dismiss. Whitmore was more complicated. He was a man who had never been wrong about anything important as far as he could tell, and this had calcified into something that looked like confidence and operated like cruelty without ever technically being either one. He came back to Silver Creek on a Wednesday afternoon alone this time, and he asked to speak with Ethan in the study. Maggie knew he was there because she could hear the murmur of voices from the hallway, and because Briggs came into the kitchen with his jaw set in a particular way that meant something he didn't want to say. "Whitmore's back," Briggs said. "I know," Maggie said. "He came about the drought arrangements. And about—" Briggs stopped. "About me," Maggie said. Briggs looked at her. He was a man who chose his words with the same care he chose everything, slowly, deliberately, based on years of evidence about what worked and what didn't. "He made some comments," he said, "the week before last. To some of the men." Maggie turned from the stove. "What kind of comments?" "The kind a man makes when he wants to undermine something without getting his hands dirty," Briggs said. "He suggested to two of the hands that a woman of your presence here was—" He stopped again, tried again. "He implied that it was unsuitable, that a woman in your position had no business developing. He used the word attachments." Maggie was very still. "He said this to the men," she said. "Two of the men, who then told three others, who told the rest by Friday morning." She turned back to the stove. "What did the men say?" she asked. Briggs was quiet for a moment. "Curtis told the man Whitmore spoke to that he'd personally escort anyone who spoke ill of you off the property at the end of his boot." He paused. "Thomas apparently said something less polite that I won't repeat." Maggie's hands went still on the pan. She breathed. She had not expected that. She had expected she was used to expecting indifference or worse. She was not accustomed to defense. She was not accustomed to people who would stand between her and the voice that said she was not enough. "I see," she said. Her voice was steady. "They're good men," Briggs said. "They see a good woman. It ain't complicated from their end." Maggie was quiet for a moment. "Thank you for telling me," she said. Briggs nodded once. "Thought you should know what you've built here," he said, "in case you ever start wondering whether it's real." He left, and Maggie stood at the stove and let herself feel the full weight of what he had said, which was considerable, and then she set it carefully aside and focused on the work, because the work was what she had, and the work was what was real, and the work was what she could control when everything else was uncertain. The meeting between Ethan and Whitmore lasted nearly 2 hours. She knew it was not going well before it ended. She could hear it in the register of the voices. Not the words, but the shape of them. The rising tension that even a kitchen wall and a closed door couldn't fully contain. Whitmore had a voice that knew how to pressure without raising itself. Ethan's silences were the silences of a man holding something back at considerable cost. When Whitmore left, she heard the front door close with more force than was strictly necessary. Ethan appeared in the kitchen 15 minutes later. He looked like a man who had been carrying a weight for 2 hours and had only managed to shift it slightly, not put it down. "He doubled his offer," Ethan said. He sat down heavily at the work table. Maggie poured him coffee and set it in front of him without a word. "The merger would solve the water access problem," he said. "His property borders the Eastern Creek line. If I had legal access to that water through a partnership arrangement, I could sustain the herd through a drought that would otherwise—" He stopped. "It's a good deal. On paper, it's a very good deal." "What's it not on paper?" Maggie asked. He looked up at her. "What do you mean?" "Every deal has two sides," she said. "What's on paper, and what's actually being bought and sold." She sat down across from him with her own coffee. "What does Whitmore actually want?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "Control," he said finally. The land merger would give him controlling interest in the water rights for the Eastern Corridor, which means every small ranch between here and Caldwell Creek would have to go through him for water access. Including you, including me, eventually. Maggie absorbed this. So he would solve your drought problem by making you dependent on him. Yes. And the marriage arrangement. Clara would inherit the Whitmore holdings. If we married, it would consolidate the land and the water rights under... He stopped. Under a single family entity. Under Whitmore's influence, Maggie said, regardless of whose name was on the deed. The corner of his mouth tightened. You see it clearly. I'm not involved, she said. It's easier to see clearly when you're not the one being asked to sign. He looked at her with the expression she had come to know the real one, underneath all the careful management. What would you do? He asked. She considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything. I would find another way to the water, she said. Because any solution that makes you permanently indebted to a man like Whitmore isn't a solution. It's a delay. He's not offering a partnership. He's offering a cage with a comfortable lining. The silence that followed was the kind that happens when someone says the thing that was true all along but needed to be said out loud to become fully real. Ethan picked up his coffee cup, held it, didn't drink. There might be another option, he said slowly. Briggs mentioned a cooperative arrangement with the ranches to the north, shared water management. It would be slower to arrange, more complicated, and it wouldn't solve the immediate problem. How immediate is the immediate problem? Maggie asked. 40 days, maybe 50, before we're in serious trouble. What would serious trouble look like? Herd reduction, loss of the summer cattle we've been building for 3 years, and after that... He stopped. His jaw was tight. I'd recover. Silver Creek would recover, but it would set us back 2 years at minimum. Maggie thought about this. Is 2 years of difficulty worse than permanent dependence? She asked. He looked at her for a long, steady moment. No, he said. It isn't. Then you already know what you're going to do, she said. He was quiet for a beat. Then, the North Ranchers, the cooperative arrangement. I'd need someone who understands supply management and resource allocation to help me build the proposal. Briggs knows cattle. He doesn't know numbers. I know numbers, Maggie said. He stopped. My grandmother was a careful woman, Maggie said. She kept every account of everything she ever grew, bought, sold, preserved, or traded for 30 years. She taught me how to read a supply situation and find the places where the waste is hiding. She paused. I've been keeping accounts of the kitchen supplies since my 2nd week here. I can show you where we've been losing resources and where we can recover them. The same principles apply to water management. Ethan stared at her. You've been keeping accounts, he said. It's my job to manage resources efficiently, she said. I don't know another way to manage things. He was still staring. What? She said. Maggie, he said. And there was something in his voice she hadn't heard before, not just warmth, but a kind of wondering that was almost undone. Where have you been all my life? The words came out before he could catch them. She could see the moment he realized he'd said them, the slight tightening, the beginning of a retreat, the familiar armor moving to close. She didn't let it land like a confession. She kept her face easy, her voice light. Missouri mostly, she said. Then Millhaven, and now here. He breathed. The armor stood down, and something between them, fragile and new and entirely real, held. They worked on the proposal together for 3 evenings running. It was nothing like what either of them expected. Maggie spread her kitchen ledgers across the work table alongside the ranch's supply records, and she showed Ethan a methodology she had developed over years of managing household resources with too little margin for error. She tracked not just consumption, but patterns, the cycles of waste, the timing of shortages, the predictable gaps between what was available and what was needed. Applied to water management, the principles translated with startling clarity. Here, she said on the 2nd evening, pointing to a column in her ledger. The waste isn't in the shortage, it's in the distribution. The same amount of water distributed differently covers 3 times the ground. Ethan leaned over the ledger beside her, his shoulder close to hers without quite touching, and looked at the numbers. That's the argument for the cooperative, he said slowly. That's exactly the argument. Shared distribution managed collectively reduces the impact of individual shortage by averaging it across a larger base, Maggie said. Nobody suffers the full weight of the drought alone. He straightened and looked at her. You could have been a business partner, he said. To anyone, in any enterprise. I was never given the chance to be, she said. He heard what was beneath that. She could tell he heard it, the full weight of it, the years compressed into a single quiet sentence. The chances she had never been offered because of how she looked, how much space she occupied, how far outside the expected category of valuable person she fell. I'm giving you the chance now, he said. If you want it. She looked at him. What does that mean exactly? She asked. It means your name goes on this proposal alongside mine, he said. As co-architect, you helped build it. You should be credited for it. She was quiet. People will talk, she said. People are already talking, he said. And the people who matter on this ranch think you hung the moon, so I'm not particularly worried about the other ones. It was not a romantic declaration. It was something more durable than that. It was a man staking his professional reputation on her worth. Saying, I am willing to be publicly associated with your intelligence and your competence and your value, and I don't care who objects. Maggie felt something break loose in her chest. All right, she said. My name goes on it. Good, he said, and they went back to the ledgers. The proposal went to the North Ranchers on a Friday, delivered by Briggs with Ethan and Maggie's combined analysis attached in 12 pages of precise, clear-handed writing that Maggie had copied out the night before. The response came back faster than expected. 4 of the 6 ranchers agreed within 5 days. The other 2 asked for a meeting. Ethan came into the kitchen with the responses, spreading the letters on the work table. And his expression was something Maggie hadn't seen on him before, the expression of a man who is surprised by hope, who has been without it long enough that its return is almost disorienting. They agreed, he said. I see that, Maggie said. The Calloway brothers want to meet, but their letter is... He held it up. It's not a refusal. They're negotiating. Which means they want in, Maggie said. They're just making sure they get fair terms. That's exactly what it means. He set the letter down, looked at her. Whitmore is not going to be happy. No, she agreed. He came by this morning while you were in the root cellar. He knows about the cooperative proposal. Maggie went still. How? He has people in town who talk. He always has. Ethan's jaw was tight. He made some remarks about the source of the proposal, about who had been advising me. What kind of remarks? Ethan was quiet for a moment. His hands, flat on the work table, were not quite steady. The kind, he said carefully, that I will not repeat in your presence because they do not deserve the dignity of repetition. She looked at him. Ethan, he questioned your character, he said. The words were bitten off, controlled, but she could hear what was underneath them. He suggested that a woman like you, that your interest in my business affairs was, he used the word scheme. The word landed like a stone in still water. Maggie breathed. She knew this word. She had been accused of scheming her whole life by people who could not conceive that a woman who looked like her might have genuine abilities, genuine desires, genuine worth. Scheming was the word people reached for when they needed to explain competence they didn't want to credit. It was the word that turned intelligence into manipulation, helpfulness into calculation, presence into predation. What did you say to him? She asked. Ethan looked at her directly. His eyes were clear and steady, and something in them was very close to anger, but a controlled anger, the kind that has chosen its direction. I told him. Ethan said that if he ever spoke about you again in those terms on my property or off it, I would take it as a personal insult and respond accordingly. He paused. I also told him that the cooperative proposal was built on the finest analytical thinking I have seen applied to resource management in 20 years of ranching and that the woman who helped me build it was worth more to this ranch and to this territory than Charles Whitmore and everything he owned put together. The kitchen was very quiet. Maggie looked at him for a long moment. She had been defended before. She had been told she was valued before. But it had always come with a caveat, with an asterisk, with a but of course, or an all things considered, or a you're actually quite good for someone like you. She had never in her adult life been defended absolutely, without qualification, without the implicit reminder that she should still be grateful she was being defended at all. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was not entirely steady. "Don't thank me," he said. "It's the truth. I should have been saying it out loud since the second week you were here." She looked away out the kitchen window. The eastern pastures, the hawk country, the mountains going blue. "People are going to keep talking," she said. "They are," he said. "It could get worse before it gets better." "Yes," he said. "It could." "Does that concern you?" He was quiet for a moment, long enough that she turned back to look at him. "What concerns me," he said, "is that a woman who has spent her whole life being dismissed and underestimated and sent away, what concerns me is that she might decide this situation is more trouble than it's worth, and leave." He paused. The words were measured, but the feeling underneath them was not. "That's what concerns me." Maggie looked at him. She thought about the morning she had left the Hargrove house with her traveling bag and her grandmother's recipe book and $11.40. She thought about the promise she had made to herself in that kitchen, "I will not beg." She thought about what it had cost her over years to keep that promise. The loneliness of it. The stubborn, unglamorous daily discipline of refusing to make herself smaller so that other people could feel larger. She thought about the kitchen at Silver Creek. Thomas leaving the supper table cleaner than he found it. Curtis and the extra piece of cornbread. Henderson's river stone on the windowsill. Briggs telling her thought you should know what you've built here in case you ever start wondering whether it's real. She thought about a man eating blackberry pie at 10 o'clock at night and saying for the first time in 8 years something true about himself. "I'm not leaving," she said. Ethan's breath came out slightly unsteady. "Good," he said. "But Ethan..." She looked at him squarely. "I need you to understand something. I'm not staying because I have nowhere else to go. I have nowhere else to go that's true, but that's not why I'm staying." She held his gaze. "I'm staying because this is the first place I have ever worked where the work mattered, where I mattered, and I will fight for that the same way I fought for everything else in my life with everything I have for as long as I can." She paused. "So you don't need to worry about me leaving. You need to decide if you're willing to fight for it too." The silence that followed was the longest silence they had shared yet. When Ethan Callahan spoke, his voice was quiet, but it did not waver. "I'm willing," he said. The meeting with the Calloway brothers happened on a Tuesday. Maggie did not attend. It was held at the Calloway Ranch, and Ethan went with Briggs and one of the hands. She spent the day in the kitchen, doing what she did every day, and she did not allow herself to track the hours or count the distance. But she found herself listening for the sound of horses returning. She heard them in the late afternoon earlier than she expected, and she told herself she was not listening for anything in particular as she took the bread from the oven and set it on the rack to cool. The kitchen door opened. Ethan came in. He was dusty from the ride, and his face was... She took one look at his face, and everything in her chest settled. "They're in," he said. She let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "All 6, he said. "Cooperative water management agreement to be formalized in writing within 30 days. Shared infrastructure, shared cost, shared benefit." He set his hat on the peg by the door and ran a hand through his hair. "Silver Creek is going to be all right, Maggie." She turned back to the bread. "I know," she said. "You knew before I left." "I knew the proposal was sound," she said. "Sound proposals tend to succeed when presented to reasonable people." He laughed. It was the first time she had heard him laugh. Really laugh, Not the short, dry exhale she had occasionally provoked before, but an actual laugh with actual warmth in it, the kind that has lived in a person's chest for a long time and simply forgotten it was there. She went still for just a moment. He noticed. "What?" he said. She shook her head. "Nothing," she said. I don't think I'd heard you laugh before." He was quiet. "No," he said. "I don't think you had. It suits you," she said. Simply, without making more of it than it was. He looked at her for a moment with that expression, the real one, the one without armor, and then he went to wash up for supper, and Maggie stood at the breadboard with her hands still and thought, something is changing here, has been changing for weeks, and we are both pretending we don't know what it is, and that is wise and necessary. And also, she was honest enough to admit this to herself, it will not hold forever. Some things have their own gravity. Some things move toward each other regardless of what you tell them to do. It was Whitmore who forced the question. He did not come to Silver Creek this time. He was smarter than that. Instead, he arrived at the story from the outside. The way water gets into a structure, not through the obvious openings, but through the invisible ones, the hairline gaps that nobody thinks to seal. He wrote a letter, not to Ethan, to the North Ranchers, specifically to the two Calloway brothers, who were the newest and most uncertain members of the cooperative arrangement. Maggie did not see the letter herself. She heard about it from Ethan, who heard about it from the older Calloway brother, who had the basic decency to send the letter directly to Ethan with a note attached that said, "Thought you should see what's being circulated." Ethan brought the letter to the kitchen. He laid it on the work table in front of Maggie and did not say anything. She read it. It was elegant in the particular way that knives are elegant. It did not make crude accusations. It did not use blunt language. It raised questions, careful, measured, reasonable-sounding questions about the wisdom of entering into a significant financial arrangement based on the advice of someone whose interest in the arrangement might not be entirely professional. It wondered aloud with great apparent reasonableness whether the ranchers of the Northern Cooperative had fully considered the character and motivations of all parties involved in designing the proposal. It did not name her. It did not have to. Maggie read it twice, set it down. "He's trying to collapse the cooperative," she said. "Yes. By making the others question whether the proposal was built in good faith. Yes. He can't attack the proposal directly because it's sound, so he's attacking the source. Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "He's attacking me," she said. "Yes," Ethan said. "He is." She looked up at him. "What did you do?" "I wrote back to both Calloway brothers this afternoon," Ethan said. "I told them the proposal was mine, that I take full responsibility for it, that the analytical framework was developed collaboratively with a member of my staff whose professional abilities I will vouch for without reservation." He paused. "And I told them that if Charles Whitmore's social opinions were going to be a factor in their business decisions, they should tell me now before we formalized anything." "What did they say?" The corner of his mouth moved. The older one wrote back within the hour. He said, and I quote, "Whitmore has been trying to run this corridor for 30 years and nobody's let him yet. We ain't starting now." Something loosened in Maggie's chest. "And the younger one?" The younger one sent a separate note that just said, "The lady's pie is the best we've ever tasted. We're in." Maggie blinked. "He tried your pie. Briggs apparently sent some to the meeting as he called it a good faith gesture." Ethan's expression was the most human she had ever seen it. "I suspect Briggs had his own reasons." Maggie shook her head slowly. She thought about the river stone on the windowsill, the extra piece of cornbread, Curtis and his hard jaw and his quiet loyalty, Thomas and his earnest sunburned face defending her before he even knew there was anything to defend. She had built something here. She had not meant to. She had come to Silver Creek to survive, to do honest work, to build a life with enough stability to stand on. She had not come to build something that would hold when a man like Whitmore tried to shake it. But she had built it anyway, because that was what happened when you cooked with love and managed with integrity, and treated people like they were worth caring about. You built something, without trying, without even noticing. Maggie, Ethan said. She looked at him. He was standing across the work table from her with the letter still between them. And his expression was doing the complicated thing. It had been doing more and more, the thing where the armor came all the way down. And what was underneath was simply entirely vulnerably real. I owe you an apology, he said. She frowned slightly. For what? For taking 8 years to start living again, he said. And for not seeing sooner? He stopped, tried again. For not seeing sooner that the reason I started living again had a name. The kitchen was absolutely silent. Maggie looked at him. She could feel her own heart doing something that she had not given it permission to do, something that was both terrifying and, underneath the terror, something that felt like coming home. Ethan, she said carefully. I know, he said. I know what people say. I know what Whitmore says. I know what the town thinks. He held her gaze. I don't care about any of it. You should care about some of it, she said. You have a ranch to protect. You have men who depend on you. I have been protecting things for 8 years, he said. I have been keeping everything safe and managed and at a proper distance for 8 years. And it has kept me. He stopped. His voice was steady, but the effort of keeping it so was visible. It has kept me alive, he said. It has not kept me living. She was quiet. The space between them felt charged with something enormous and patient, something that had been building since a cold kitchen and a jar of forgotten blackberry preserves, and a man who froze over a slice of pie at 10 o'clock at night. I'm not asking for anything, he said. I'm not asking you to. I'm not making any claim. I just needed you to know. He paused. Whatever this is. Whatever has been happening in this kitchen and in this house and in me since you walked through that gate with your grandmother's recipe book. I needed you to know that it's real, that it isn't convenience or gratitude or whatever Whitmore thinks it is. His voice was very quiet. It is the most real thing that has happened to me in 8 years. Maggie looked at him for a long, long moment. She thought about the promise she had made herself. I will not beg. She thought about what it meant to stand in your own worth, not performing confidence, not pretending the fear wasn't there, but choosing to stand anyway, to stay anyway, to reach towards something even when every past experience suggested the reaching would end in pain. Ethan, she said. Her voice was steady. I have spent my whole life being told I was not worth choosing. He opened his mouth. She held up her hand gently. I'm not saying that to... I'm saying it because you need to understand what it means when I tell you I believe you. She held his gaze. I don't say that lightly. I don't believe most people easily. But I believe you. He breathed. What does that mean? He asked. Not pushing. Just asking. It means, she said, that we go slowly and carefully and we do this right. She paused. Because we are both people who have been hurt. And we both deserve to do this right. Ethan looked at her. Something in his face, the final thing, the last held-back piece of it, let go. Yes, he said, soft and certain. We do. Outside the kitchen window, the Wyoming summer evening was going gold, and the eastern pastures were lit with it, and Silver Creek Ranch was holding, and the cooperative was holding, and 40 men would eat a good supper tonight, and somewhere, a young man named Thomas was probably already looking forward to Sunday's pie. And in the kitchen, 2 people who had each in their own way stopped believing they were worth choosing, stood on either side of a work table and made without ceremony and without witnesses the quietest and most courageous decision either of them had ever made. They chose to try. Going slowly and carefully, it turned out, was something neither of them was very good at. Not because they rushed. They didn't rush. They were, in fact, almost painfully deliberate. 2 people who had been hurt in different ways by different things, and who understood, without having to say it directly, that this particular thing was worth protecting from their own impatience. But going slowly did not mean going backward. It did not mean pretending the conversation in the kitchen had not happened. It did not mean returning to the careful distance of employer and employee, the polite transactional surface they had maintained for the first weeks of her time at Silver Creek. It meant something harder and better than any of those things. It meant being honest. Ethan started eating supper in the kitchen instead of the dining room. Not every night. There were nights when the ranch demanded his presence elsewhere. Nights when the drought logistics pulled him in 4 directions, and he didn't surface until long after the hands had turned in. But the nights he was free, he came to the kitchen. He sat at the work table while Maggie finished the cleaning and they talked. Sometimes about the ranch, sometimes about nothing in particular, sometimes about the things that mattered most, the things that cost something to say out loud. He told her about his wife Eleanor on a Tuesday night in late July. He didn't plan it. Maggie could tell he didn't plan it because his face did the thing it did when something came out sideways, unexpected even to himself. They had been talking about the cooperative's first formal water-sharing schedule, and then there was a pause, and in the pause he said, "Eleanor used to call this the best hour of the day, after supper, when the work was done, but the night wasn't yet." Maggie went still. She kept her hands moving, drying a pan, setting it on the rack, but she went still inside the careful stillness of someone trying not to frighten something that has come tentatively into the light. "She sounds like a woman who paid attention to things," Maggie said. "She paid attention to everything," Ethan said. His voice was even, but she had learned to hear what was underneath the evenness. She was the kind of person who she made everything matter. She'd find something worth noticing in the most ordinary Tuesday, and she'd point it out, and after she pointed it out, you couldn't unsee it. He paused. "After she died, I stopped noticing things. I stopped looking." "I know," Maggie said. He looked up at her. "Not the specific grief," she said quickly. "I don't know that. But I know what it feels like to stop looking, to decide that paying attention only leads to loss, so it's safer to just move through." She set the pan down. "I did it too. For years." "What made you start again?" he asked. She thought about it honestly. "Coming here," she said. "This kitchen, these men." A pause. "You." He was quiet for a long moment. "I reckon that's the most honest thing anybody's said to me in 8 years, he said. "I reckon honesty is the only thing worth spending time on," she said. "At our age." He looked at her. "You're 32. I've lived a 32 that feels considerably older," she said. He almost smiled. "Yeah," he said. "I know that feeling." The drought deepened in August. It arrived not as a sudden catastrophe, but as a slow, relentless pressure, the kind of thing that doesn't announce itself, but simply tightens day by day, degree by degree, until one morning you look around and realize that everything has been squeezed down to something smaller and harder than it used to be. The cooperative water-sharing agreement was holding, but only just. The Calloway brothers reported that their section of the creek was running lower than any summer in recent memory. The shared schedule meant Silver Creek had access to the water it needed, but access and abundance were very different things, and Ethan was managing the difference with the careful precision of a man walking a wire. He was not sleeping. Maggie knew this because she was often in the kitchen before 4, and he was often already in his study light under the door papers on his desk when she passed the hallway. She did not say anything about it directly. She started leaving a covered plate outside his study door on those mornings. Something simple, something that could be eaten without thought. Biscuit and salt pork and a small jar of coffee. She never mentioned it, and he never mentioned it. But the plates always came back empty. Curtis found her one morning setting the plate down and looked at her for a long moment. "You know that man ain't eaten a proper breakfast in 8 years before you got here," he said. "He's eating now," Maggie said. "Yes, ma'am," Curtis said. "He is." She did not look up from the plate she was arranging. "Is there something you wanted to say, Curtis?" "Just," Curtis said, and then stopped. Tried again. "Just that it's good to see him looked after. By somebody who does it because they mean it." He cleared his throat. "That's all, ma'am." She looked up then. His face was the face of a man who had served someone loyally for a very long time and watched that someone diminish from a distance and been unable to do anything about it. The relief in his expression was so unguarded that it made her chest hurt. "He's going to be all right, Curtis," she said. "I know it," Curtis said. "Now I know it." Whitmore moved on a Wednesday. He didn't come to Silver Creek this time. He went around it. He convened what he called an informal meeting of area ranchers at the Millhaven Hotel, a gathering that presented itself as neighborly conversation, but functioned, as Briggs reported afterward, with his jaw set and his eyes flat as a carefully orchestrated campaign to undermine the cooperative before it could fully establish itself. Briggs had attended. Not officially, not invited, but the son of one of the Callaway hands was working at the hotel that week, and he knew Briggs, and he sent word the morning of the meeting. Briggs walked in uninvited. "He wasn't happy to see me," Briggs told Ethan and Maggie afterward, standing in the kitchen with his hat in his hands and a look on his face like a man who has done something that needed doing and is not sorry about it. "Had about 12 men in that room. Mix of actual ranchers and a couple I didn't recognize, lawyers maybe, or accountants. Whitmore's kind of people." "What was he saying?" Ethan asked. "That the cooperative was financially unsound, that shared water management created shared liability, that if one member of the arrangement couldn't meet their obligations, the whole thing could be held responsible." Briggs paused. "He had papers, legal-looking. He was passing them around and letting people read them, and looking very concerned and reasonable." "Were the papers genuine?" Maggie asked. Briggs looked at her. "I took one. Couldn't tell. But I've got it here." He pulled a folded document from his vest pocket and set it on the work table. Maggie picked it up. She read it the way she read supply lists and account ledgers, carefully, systematically, looking for the structure beneath the surface. Legal language was not her native tongue, but she had learned over years to read documents the way her grandmother had taught her to read recipes. Look for what it's actually telling you to do, not just what it says. She read it twice. Then she set it down. "It's not wrong exactly," she said, "but it's not describing the cooperative we built. The liability structure it's warning against is a different kind of arrangement, one where members are bound by each other's debts." She looked at Ethan. "Our cooperative agreement, the one we wrote, specifically excludes cross-liability. Each member is responsible only for their own obligations." Ethan looked at the document. "So he's warning them about a risk that doesn't exist in our specific arrangement." "He's describing a general risk that does exist in poorly structured cooperatives," Maggie said, "and letting people assume it applies to ours, without ever technically lying." The silence that followed had a particular quality, the quality of something becoming clear that has been half visible for a while. "He knew our agreement," Ethan said slowly. "He's seen it. He knows it excludes cross-liability." "Yes," Maggie said. "He's doing it deliberately." "Yes." Ethan's expression went through several things quickly. She watched it, the anger, then the calculation, then the decision. "Can you write a counter-document?" he asked. "Something that addresses this specific claim directly. Something the ranchers can read side by side with Whitmore's paper and see the distinction." "I can have it done by tonight," she said. He looked at her. "Tonight." "Tonight," she said. "Go deal with the ranch. I'll handle this." He held her gaze for a moment. "Maggie," he said. "Go," she said. He went. Pat. She worked at the kitchen table for 6 hours, pausing only to manage the supper rush, and then returning to the papers the moment the kitchen was clean. The counter-document needed to be clear enough for a rancher to read and precise enough to hold up against legal scrutiny, and it needed to do both of those things without sounding like an argument, because arguments put people on the defensive and defensive. People don't change their minds. It needed to sound like the truth, which it was. That helped. Thomas came into the kitchen around 8 o'clock, saw her working, and silently made her a cup of coffee and set it beside her without a word. She looked up. He shrugged. "You always bring us coffee when we're doing something hard," he said. "Figured it worked both ways." She looked at him for a moment. This 19-year-old boy, who was 1,000 miles from home, learning what it meant to be a man in the only way available to him, which was by paying attention to the people around him who were doing it right. "Thank you, Thomas," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and left her to it. She finished the counter document just before 10. She read it once more, made 2 small corrections, and set down her pen. Ethan was in the doorway. She didn't know how long he had been standing there. Long enough from the look on his face. She slid the document across the table. He picked it up and read it standing, and she watched his expression move through attention into something that was not quite surprise, but adjacent to it, the expression of someone who knew a thing was possible and is still slightly undone by seeing it demonstrated. He set the document down. "This is extraordinary," he said. "It's accurate," she said. "That's all it needs to be." "It's more than accurate," he said. "It's Maggie, this will settle the question. Any man who reads this alongside Whitmore's paper will see exactly what he was doing." "That's the intention," she said. He looked at her across the table. The kitchen was quiet. The rest of the ranch was asleep. "He's going to come at you harder," Ethan said. "When this gets out, when the ranchers see it and understand what it means, he's going to know it came from you, and he's going to—" "I know," Maggie said. "Are you ready for that?" She looked at him. "I've been ready for that my whole life," she said. "People like Whitmore have been coming at me since I was old enough to notice. The only difference now is I've got something worth defending." She paused. "And people worth defending it with." Something moved across his face. "You have," he said, quietly. "Certainly." She nodded. "Then send the document." Whitmore's response came 3 days later, and it came not in paper or in person, but in the particular vicious currency of small-town rumor, which was the only weapon left to him, now that his legal maneuver had been publicly and precisely dismantled. 2 women stopped speaking to the wife of one of the cooperative ranchers because of things said at a church social. A story circulated that Maggie had previously been dismissed from a wealthy household under cloudy circumstances, which was true in its skeleton, and false in every detail that gave it meaning. Someone suggested at the feed store that a woman who involved herself so deeply in a man's business affairs clearly had motives that extended beyond professional ones. None of this surprised Maggie. What surprised her was the speed with which Silver Creek responded. Briggs went to the feed store and said in the particular flat voice that men who rarely raise their voices use, when they want to be absolutely certain they are understood, that anyone who repeated that particular story on his rancher's property or in his rancher's business affairs would find themselves without a supply contract. Curtis went to the church social and sat down next to the woman who had been ostracized, and ate his dinner beside her and talked to her about her garden for 45 minutes, which in the economy of small-town dignity was worth more than any speech. Thomas, who had heard about the story at the feed store, came to Maggie in the kitchen that evening with his hat in his hands and his face working with the effort of someone who wants to say something important and is not confident they have the words. "Ma'am," he said. "Thomas," she said, "I want you to know," he said carefully, "that every man on this ranch knows exactly what kind of woman you are, and we'd say so to anybody, anywhere." He paused. I know it might not fix things the way you'd want them fixed, but I wanted you to know it." Maggie looked at him for a long moment. She thought about something her grandmother had said once, sitting on the porch in Missouri in the late summer, watching the fireflies rise from the grass. She had said, "Maggie girl, someday you're going to find yourself somewhere that your worth isn't a question. Somewhere people see it plain and simple without being told. When you find that place, you stay." "Thomas," she said. "Thank you." "Yes, ma'am," he said, and then slightly awkwardly, There's fresh berries on the windowsill, from the creek bank. Me and Henderson went this morning." She looked. There were indeed fresh berries on the windowsill, a large basket of them, deep and dark and perfect. She turned back to Thomas. He was already heading for the door with the rapid efficiency of someone who has said a thing and would like to leave before it becomes more complicated than intended. "Thomas," she said. He stopped. "Sunday pie is going to be exceptional this week," she said. His face broke into something that was entirely uncomplicated joy. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Dortag. Whitmore came on a Friday. He did not come in the manner of a man making a casual visit. He came with 3 men behind him, and the particular posture of someone who has decided that subtlety has failed and is now trying force dressed up in the language of reasonableness. Ethan met him in the yard. Maggie was in the kitchen, but the kitchen window faced the yard, and she was not pretending she wasn't listening. "I've come to make a final offer," Whitmore said. His voice carried the clean, sharp quality of a man who had rehearsed. "The cooperative is a fragile arrangement, Callahan. One bad season, one member who can't carry their share, and the whole thing collapses. You know this." "I know the arrangement is sound," Ethan said. "I've had it reviewed." "By whom?" Whitmore asked, and she could hear the particular inflection, the implied damaging answer he wanted to provoke. "By people whose judgment I trust," Ethan said, smooth, giving nothing. "The water right situation is more precarious than you understand," Whitmore said. "I have connections at the territorial office. There are regulatory considerations that could affect cooperative arrangements. Are you threatening to use political influence to interfere with a legally established business arrangement?" Ethan's voice was still even, but something in it had changed. Something that Maggie had not heard before. A hardness that was not cold exactly, but had the quality of something that had been tested enough times to know its own strength. Whitmore paused. "I'm informing you of risks," he said carefully. "You're threatening me," Ethan said. "And I'd like you to be aware that Briggs is standing just inside the barn door, and 2 of the Callaway hands who happen to be here today are near the fence, and everyone present is hearing very clearly that you have just suggested using political connections to interfere with a legally established cooperative water arrangement." A pause. "Would you like to say it again?" Silence. It was a particular kind of silence. The kind that falls when a man realizes that the trap he thought he was setting was already set, and he walked straight into it. Whitmore recovered. Men like him always recovered. They were built for recovery, for the rapid lateral move, the pivot to a new position. "I came to make an offer," he said, resetting. "My original proposal still stands. The land merger, the water access, the no." Ethan said, "One word, clean and entire." Callahan, "No." Ethan said again, "Not the merger, not the marriage arrangement, not any version of an arrangement that gives you leverage over this ranch or this corridor. I've made my decision." He paused. "I'd like you to leave my property." The silence that followed was the longest yet. Maggie held her breath. Then she heard boots on the ground. Not Ethan's, not the slow, deliberate steps of a man who had made his position clear and was waiting. The other boots, Whitmore's, moving toward his horse. "You're making a mistake," Whitmore said. "I've made mistakes before," Ethan said. "I know what they feel like. This isn't one." She heard horses leaving. She heard the yard go quiet. Then she heard Ethan's boots on the kitchen porch, and the door opened, and he came in, and she was standing at the stove with a pan in her hand, and they looked at each other across the kitchen. "He's gone," she said. "He's gone," Ethan said. She set the pan down. "He'll try something else," she said. "He will," Ethan agreed, "but it'll take him time to regroup. And by the time he does, the cooperative will be formal and filed and considerably harder to shake." He paused. "And we'll be ready." She looked at him. "We," she said. He met her eyes. "We," he said. Simple. Deliberate. The word placed exactly where he meant it to go. She felt it land. She let it land. "All right," she said. "Then we'd better stay sharp." "We will," he said. He sat down at the work table and she poured him coffee, and outside the Wyoming summer pressed down on the parched earth, and the creek ran lower than it should, and everything was harder than it ought to be, and none of it, not one single piece of it, felt like more than they could carry. because they were not carrying it alone anymore. The moment that broke something open, truly broke it in the way that is not damage, but release, came on a Sunday evening after the pie. It had been an ordinary Sunday, as Sundays at Silver Creek had come to be the rhythm of the week's final supper. The men slightly easier than on working days, Thomas producing his basket of creek berries with the pride of a man presenting a valuable commodity, the kitchen warm and full of the smell that Maggie had come to think of simply as home. Ethan had been at the table for Sunday supper for 4 weeks running now. He sat at the end, not separate but present, and the hands had adjusted to this, the way people adjust to good changes quickly without drama, as though it had always been this way. After supper, after the kitchen was cleaned, and the men had gone to the bunkhouse and the ranch had settled into its evening quiet, Ethan stayed. He didn't stay for pie this time. He stayed for something else, and she could feel it in the quality of his presence. Something gathered in him, something he had been carrying toward a decision. She was at the sink with her back to the room when he said, "I need to tell you something." She turned. He was standing in the middle of the kitchen, not sitting, not leaning. Standing the way a person stands when what they have to say requires their full posture. "I went to the cemetery this afternoon," he said, "before supper." She was quiet. She had known there was a cemetery on the ranch property. Briggs had mentioned it once in passing. The way people mention things that are important but don't know how to approach directly. "I hadn't been in over a year," Ethan said. "I used to go every week. Then it started being, I couldn't." He stopped. It felt like going there and not suffering properly. Like if I wasn't destroyed by it, I was betraying them. Maggie waited. "I was destroyed by it for a long time," he said. "And then somewhere in the last 2 months, he stopped again. I stopped being destroyed. I am still there, still with me. I don't mean I stopped grieving. I mean the grief stopped being the whole thing. It became one part of a bigger thing. And I didn't know how to feel about that." "Ethan," she said softly. "I went today because I needed to tell them," he said. His voice was very controlled, but she could hear everything underneath the control, the vast landscape of 8 years of loss, and the particular geography of a man finding his way back from it. "I needed to tell Eleanor and my son that something was—" He stopped, collected himself. "That I had found a reason to be present again, and that I needed them to know that it wasn't a betrayal, that love doesn't have a fixed amount, that it doesn't run out when you give it to someone new." The kitchen was absolutely, completely silent. "I stood there for a long time," he said. "And then I felt, I don't know how to describe it. I felt like I had permission. I don't know if that makes sense." "It makes perfect sense," Maggie said. Her voice was steady, but only just. He looked at her. "I'm telling you this because you should know where I am," he said. "Because you deserve to know the truth of who you're dealing with. A man who has been absent for 8 years and is learning how to be present again. A man who will make mistakes, who will have bad days, days when the grief comes back in ways he didn't expect." He held her gaze. "And who is for the first time in 8 years not afraid to be honest about all of it." Maggie looked at him. She thought about her grandmother and the recipe book and the telegram and the $11.40 and the road that had brought her through every rejection and every dismissal and every 11-word goodbye to this kitchen on a Sunday evening, with a man who was standing in front of her with nothing held back. She thought, "I have been told my whole life that I was not worth this. Not worth honesty, not worth effort, not worth the particular courage of a person saying, 'Here is who I am,' all of it, the damaged parts and the healing parts and everything in between." She had stopped believing she would ever stand in a room where someone offered her that. "Ethan," she said. "Yes," he said. "Come sit down," she said. "I'll cut you the last piece of pie, and you can tell me about Eleanor." She paused. What she was like. What she noticed on ordinary Tuesdays. The things you haven't said out loud in 8 years because there was nobody you trusted to say them to. He stood very still for a moment, then something in his face the last holding back. The final armor came all the way down. Not dramatically, quietly. The way armor comes down when a person decides with their whole self that they are safe enough to set it on the ground. He sat down. She cut the pie, and they talked until midnight. And somewhere in those hours, a man who had been a ghost in his own life remembered that he was alive, and a woman who had been told she was not enough understood for the first time without reservation that she had always been more than enough. She had simply been waiting for the room where that was true. She had found it. She was staying. The morning after their midnight conversation, everything felt different, and nothing had changed. The ranch was still the ranch. The drought was still the drought. 40 men still needed breakfast by 5. Maggie was still at the stove before the sun came up, her hands moving through the familiar motions, the coffee boiling, the biscuits in the oven, the salt pork on the griddle. From the outside, it looked exactly like every other morning at Silver Creek. But something had settled. Something that had been suspended, held in careful, patient tension for weeks, had found its ground. And Maggie moved through the kitchen that morning with a quietness that was not the quietness of a woman holding herself back. It was the quietness of a woman who had arrived somewhere and knew it. Ethan was at the kitchen door by 4:30. Not his usual time. She looked up. He had his coffee, already had made it himself, which he had never done before, and he was standing in the doorway with it and looking at her with an expression she had no name for yet, but intended to learn. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep," he said. He did not say it the way he used to say things, flatly closed, offering the fact and nothing behind it. He said it simply, openly, the way a person talks to someone they have stopped pretending with. "I kept thinking about something." "What?" "That I owe you a better explanation than I gave you last night," he said. She turned fully to face him. "You gave me an honest explanation. That's the best kind. I gave you 8 years of backstory," he said. "I didn't give you a question." She waited. He came into the kitchen properly, set his coffee on the work table, and stood with his hands at his sides in the posture she had come to recognize as Ethan Callahan, meaning every word he was about to say. "I want to court you," he said. "Properly. I want this to be something that's named and acknowledged, and not just something that happens in a kitchen late at night." He paused. "I know the timing is difficult. I know the situation with Whitmore is unresolved. I know the drought isn't over, and the ranch is still under strain, and this is possibly the least convenient moment in several years to be saying this." Another pause. "But I find I cannot wait for a convenient moment. I have been waiting for convenient moments for 8 years, and I have learned that they do not come." Maggie looked at him. She felt the full weight of what he had just offered, not a declaration, not a pressure, but a request. A man asking with his whole self for the chance to do this right. "Ethan," she said, "people will have a great deal to say about it." "They already have a great deal to say," he said. "And the people on this ranch have already said the thing that matters, which is that they see you clearly and they think I'd be a fool to let you go." He held her gaze. "I agree with them." She was quiet for a moment. "All right," she said. He exhaled. "All right," he said. And the relief in those 2 words was so complete, so unguarded, that she had to look away for a moment before she said something that would embarrass them both. She turned back to the biscuits. "Now," she said, "let me finish breakfast before 40 men come through that door, and we have to explain why their boss is standing in the kitchen at 4:30 in the morning." He laughed, that real laugh, the one she had first heard after the cooperative agreement came through, the one that had spent years forgetting it existed. It filled the kitchen the way warmth fills a cold room, suddenly completely making the absence obvious by ending it. Maggie smiled at the stove. She did not let him see it, but she smiled. Thaw. Word traveled, the way it always traveled on a working ranch. Fast, quiet, and with remarkable accuracy, given that nobody had officially said anything to anyone. By breakfast's end, Curtis had found a reason to come back to the kitchen twice, which he never did. Thomas asked with studied casualness if she needed anything from the supply shed, which was not something Thomas had ever once offered. Henderson left a new river stone on the windowsill, a larger one this time, with a streak of white quartz running through the center that caught the morning light. Nobody said a word directly, but the kitchen that morning had a quality to it, a warmth that was not just the stove, a particular easiness that made people move slightly slower through the room than they had to, like they were in a place they wanted to stay in a little longer. Briggs came in last, as he usually did, taking his coffee to the doorway and standing with it in the way of a man conducting a quiet survey of his domain. He looked at Maggie. Looked at the place at the work table where Ethan had been standing 40 minutes earlier, which was no different from any other part of the work table, but which seemed somehow to Briggs's experienced eye distinct. He said nothing. He drank his coffee. As he was leaving, he paused at the door and said without turning, "Good biscuits this morning, Miss Dawson." "Thank you, Briggs," she said. "Best batch yet, I'd say," he said, and walked out. Maggie shook her head and went back to work. The drought's worst week arrived at the end of August without warning or ceremony. The creek on the cooperative's shared water schedule dropped to levels that none of the ranchers had seen in 15 years. The Calloway brothers sent word that their herd was showing stress. 2 of the Northern Cooperative members requested an emergency meeting, and Ethan came to the kitchen on a Tuesday morning with the measured expression of a man carrying information he would rather not be carrying. He laid the situation out plainly. The shared water supply, even with the cooperative's careful management, was not going to be sufficient through September if the drought held. They were looking at a genuine shortage, not catastrophic, not irreversible, but serious. Herd reductions were possible. The careful financial position that Ethan had spent 3 years building could take a significant hit. "What are the options?" Maggie asked. "Reduce the herd now before the situation gets critical and sell at lower prices, or manage the water more aggressively and hope the creek recovers before we're forced into it." He paused. "Briggs wants to hold. He thinks the creek will recover within the month." "What do you think?" "I think Briggs has 50 years of reading this land, and I trust his instincts," Ethan said. "But I also think 50 years of experience doesn't account for a drought this severe." Maggie thought, "What about the food supply for the herd?" she asked. "Not the water, the feed." He looked at her. "What about it?" "I've been tracking our kitchen supply waste for 3 months," she said. "And I've been watching the feed storage patterns because they run through the same supply chain as the kitchen provisions. There's a significant waste pattern in how the feed is being distributed." She went to the shelf where she kept her ledgers and pulled down the one she had been maintaining since her first week. She opened it to a marked page and slid it across the work table. "Look at this." He looked. The numbers were laid out in Maggie's precise handwriting columns, tracking distribution consumption and waste across the herd feeding schedule. The pattern was clear once you knew to look for it. Inefficiency in the distribution method was causing a significant percentage of feed to be wasted before the cattle could access it. Not enough to notice day to day, enough compounded over months to matter enormously. If you redistribute the feed using a modified schedule, Maggie said, pointing to the column where she had already calculated the alternative, the existing supply extends by nearly 3 weeks, which gives the creek more time to recover before you're forced into a hard decision on the herd. Ethan stared at the ledger. He was quiet for a long time. "You've been tracking the feed," he said. "I track everything that comes through the supply chain," she said. "It's the same system. I just extended it." "You calculated this when—" "Over the last 3 weeks," she said. "I wasn't sure it would be relevant. Then the creek reports came in this morning and I thought—" She paused. "I thought you should see it." He looked up from the ledger. The expression on his face was not the one she expected. It was not relief, though relief was there. It was something older and deeper, the expression of a man who has been carrying something alone for a very long time and has just had someone reach over and take part of the weight without being asked. "Maggie," he said, "before you say anything," she said, "this is just good resource management. Any competent—" "Stop," he said. She stopped. "You just saved this ranch 3 weeks," he said. That is not just good resource management. That is—" He stopped. Tried again. "That is you. That is the way your mind works, and the way you care about this place, and the way you have been quietly without any recognition or requirement to do so. Extending your professional concern beyond your explicit responsibilities because you care what happens here." He held her gaze. "Don't minimize it." She was quiet. "Don't minimize yourself," he said. "Not here, not with me." She looked at him steadily and felt the precise, particular, long-awaited experience of being accurately seen. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. He took the ledger to Briggs. The feed redistribution plan went into effect the following morning, and the results were immediate enough to make even Briggs, who trusted data considerably less than he trusted instinct, go quiet in a particular way that meant he was revising his opinion of something. "Where'd this analysis come from?" he asked Ethan at the end of the first day. "Maggie," Ethan said. Briggs was quiet for a moment. "She's been tracking the feed supply. She's been tracking everything," Ethan said. "Since her second week." Another silence. "I'll be damned," Briggs said. Not with surprise exactly, with something more like the satisfaction of a man whose judgment has been confirmed in a way he hadn't anticipated. "Yes," Ethan said. "She's something," Briggs said. "She is," Ethan agreed. Briggs picked up his hat from the fence post. "You planning to do something about that?" "I'm working on it," Ethan said. "Work faster," Briggs said. "Men like you don't find women like her twice." He put his hat on and walked toward the barn, and Ethan stood at the fence, looking at the pastures, and thought that might be the most words Briggs had said about anything personal in the 3 years he'd been at Silver Creek. He went to find Maggie. She was in the kitchen where she always was in the late afternoon, not cooking yet, but planning her grandmother's recipe book open and her own ledger beside it, the two documents she treated as equally essential and consulted with equal reverence. She looked up when he came in. He sat down across from her. "The Calloway brothers sent word," he said. "They're implementing the same feed redistribution on their end. Apparently the numbers translate directly." "Good," she said. "The whole cooperative is going to come through this," he said. "All 6 ranches, because of what you found." She nodded. "Let it be." "I want to take you to supper," he said. She looked up from the recipe book. "In town," he said. "At the hotel, properly. In public." He held her gaze. "I want people to see." She understood immediately what he was saying and what he wasn't saying. He was saying, "I want to counter the narrative. I want Millhaven to see Ethan Callahan take Margaret Dawson to supper at the hotel dining room and understand exactly what that means." He was saying, "I am willing to make this visible." "They'll talk," she said. "They're already talking," he said. "I'd rather give them something accurate to talk about." She looked at him. He was steady, certain, unashamed, the expression of a man who has made a decision all the way through and is not looking for permission but offering a choice. "When?" she said. "Saturday." She considered it. She thought about the Hargrove family and their 11-word telegram. She thought about every voice that had ever said she didn't belong in the rooms that mattered. She thought about what her grandmother would say, and she knew exactly what her grandmother would say, because her grandmother had always known when to be bold and when caution was just fear wearing a practical hat. "I'll need to ask Thomas to manage supper," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "I'll speak to Thomas. He'll be nervous." "He'll be fine," Ethan said. "He's been watching you do it for 3 months. He knows exactly what to do." She nodded once. "Saturday, then," she said. Something in Ethan's expression, quiet, warm, certain, settled like a thing coming to rest. "Saturday," he said. Here, the news reached Whitmore before Saturday. She did not know how she suspected Mrs. Fitch, who could be relied upon to carry information between locations with the speed and enthusiasm of a telegraph line with personal opinions, But it reached him, and his response was the one she should have anticipated and did not quite prepare herself for. He came to Silver Creek on Friday morning, not to the yard, not to the house. He came to the kitchen door. She was alone. Ethan was at the north pasture with Briggs. The hands were on the range. The ranch was quiet in the specific mid-morning quiet of a working day. She heard the knock and opened the door and found Charles Whitmore standing on the kitchen porch with his hat in his hand and an expression that had been carefully arranged to look like concern. She did not step back. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. "Miss Dawson," he said. "I was hoping we might speak privately." "Mr. Callahan isn't on the property at the moment," she said. "I know," he said. "I came to speak with you, not with him." She studied him. He was not a stupid man. She had never thought he was a stupid man. He was a man who had been powerful for so long that he had forgotten the difference between his power and his intelligence, and that was dangerous in a different way. She stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said. He came in and stood in the center of the kitchen and looked around it in the way that people look at rooms they are trying to understand. She could see him reading at the careful organization, the recipe book on the shelf, the ledger on the work table, the river stone on the windowsill. She could see him calculating. "You've made quite a place for yourself here," he said. "I do my job well," she said. "You do considerably more than your job," he said. "The feed analysis, the counter document, the cooperative proposal." He looked at her directly. "You're a very intelligent woman, Miss Dawson." She waited. She knew this was not the point. "Which is exactly why I think you can hear what I'm about to say clearly," he said, "without taking offense." "Say it," she said. He was quiet for a moment, organizing. "Ethan Callahan is a good man," he said. "A respected man. He has spent 8 years rebuilding a reputation and an estate that were badly damaged by grief. The choices he makes now will determine whether Silver Creek remains what it is, a property of significance in this territory, or whether it becomes something smaller." He paused. "The choice to pursue a relationship with a woman in your position, in your circumstances, would not be received well. It would undermine the respect he has spent 8 years earning. The business relationships, the social standing, the reputation that allows a man to be taken seriously in land negotiations and territorial politics. All of it depends on people believing that his judgment is sound." The kitchen was very quiet. Maggie looked at him. She let him finish. She always let people finish. Her grandmother had taught her that too. Let them say the whole thing, because people who are not interrupted reveal considerably more than they intend to. "And you believe," she said, "that choosing me demonstrates unsound judgment." "I believe," Whitmore said carefully, "that the world is not always fair in its assessments, and that a man in Callahan's position cannot afford to be careless about how he is perceived." "And what do you get," she said, "from Ethan Callahan not choosing me?" The directness of the question landed. She watched it land. He recovered quickly. "I beg your pardon. You've come a long way out of your way to warn me," she said. "Multiple times. You've written letters. You've spoken to his men. You came to his yard and threatened his business relationships. And now you're standing in his kitchen telling me directly that I should remove myself from the situation." She held his gaze without moving. "That is a significant investment of time and energy for a man who claims to be motivated by concern for Ethan Callahan's reputation." She paused. "So I'll ask again. What do you get if I leave?" The silence that followed told her everything. Whitmore was very still. Then something happened. Something she did not entirely expect. The careful arrangement of his expression shifted. Just slightly. Just enough. Not to honesty exactly, but to something more tired than he had arrived with. "The cooperative weakens my position in this corridor considerably," he said. "Not the rehearsed version, the real one. If Callahan is distracted, if his personal life becomes complicated, if his judgment is questioned, the cooperative is more vulnerable. Disputes, second-guessing the other members, wondering if his leadership is stable." He stopped. "You are not Miss Dawson, someone I underestimate. That is precisely the problem." Maggie looked at him. She felt an unexpected, complicated thing. Not sympathy, nothing approaching sympathy, but a kind of clear-eyed recognition. Here was a man telling the truth for possibly the first time in this entire sequence of events. Not because he chose to, but because she had pushed past the performance and found the real architecture underneath. "I appreciate your honesty," she said, "even though it comes late." He looked at her steadily. "You're not going to leave," he said. "No," she said, "even knowing what it will cost." "I know what it will cost," she said. "I have always known. The question is not the cost, Mr. Whitmore. The question is the value." She looked at him. "And I know the value." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he put his hat back on. "You are a remarkable woman," he said. There was no warmth in it, but there was truth. The reluctant truth of a man who has come to take something and is leaving empty-handed and knows it. "Thank you," she said. "The door's behind you." He left. She stood in the kitchen and breathed for a moment. Just breathed. Let the adrenaline of the conversation work its way through her and out. Then she went to the stove, because supper wasn't going to make itself. She told Ethan when he came in from the north pasture. She told him plainly the way she told him everything directly fully, without softening the parts that were hard. She told him what Whitmore had said, and what she had said back, and the real reason Whitmore had given when the performance fell away. Ethan listened without interrupting. His expression did the thing where it moved through several things rapidly. Anger was there clean and justified, but it did not stay. What stayed was something steadier. When she finished, he said, "You faced him alone." "He came when you were out," she said. "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "I should have been here." "Ethan," she said, "I have been facing men like Whitmore alone my entire life. I did not need you to face him for me." "I know that," he said. "That's not—" He stopped. "I wanted to be here, not because you needed me, because this is ours now. The fight is ours, and I want to be beside you in it." She looked at him. Ours. She felt the words settle into her chest the way warmth settles into cold hands gradually, then completely changing the temperature of everything. "He's going to try again," she said. "He is," Ethan said. "And we are going to be ready. Together." He held her gaze. "Are you still willing to have supper with me tomorrow night?" "I am," she said. "Good." He reached into his jacket and set something on the work table between them, a small folded piece of paper. "I wrote to the Territorial Land Office this morning about formalizing your contribution to the cooperative proposal, having your name on the founding documents, not just in my private records." She stared at the paper. "Your name belongs on it," he said. "Officially, permanently, where no one can take it off." She picked up the paper, unfolded it, read his handwriting, straight, plain, unambiguous, her name beside his on the documentation of the cooperative that was saving 6 ranches through the worst drought in 15 years. Margaret Dawson. Right there, in ink. Permanent. She set the paper down. She looked at him, and for the first time in 32 years, Margaret Dawson, who had been told she was not enough, not suitable, not worth the dignity of permanence, felt herself in possession of something that could not be taken back. Not by a telegram. Not by 11 words. Not by a man like Whitmore, or a town like Millhaven, or any arithmetic that measured her worth by the size of her body, or the lightness of her purse. Her eyes filled. She did not let them spill. She looked at the work table and breathed and did not let them spill. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steady, barely. "Don't thank me," he said, soft and certain. "It's the truth, and the truth belongs on the record." She nodded, collected herself. "Saturday supper," she said. "Saturday supper," he confirmed. She picked up the paper, folded it carefully, and placed it in the front cover of her grandmother's recipe book. Between the first page where her grandmother's handwriting said, "This is yours," and the rest of what followed. Her inheritance. Growing. Saturday came clear and warm, the drought holding but the creek as Briggs had predicted, with the infuriating accuracy of a man who had been reading that land for decades, showing the first signs of recovery. A quarter-inch of rise on the gauge post. Enough to matter. Enough to confirm that the feed redistribution plan had bought the time they needed. Briggs told Ethan in the yard and then told Maggie in the kitchen on separate occasions, with the same contained satisfaction. The satisfaction of a man who did not say, "I told you so," because he did not need to. "Creek's coming back," he told her. "I know," she said. "I saw the gauge this morning." He nodded, started to leave. "Briggs," she said. He stopped. "Thank you," she said, "for everything you've done this summer. For seeing me clearly when others didn't. For telling the men what I was worth when I couldn't say it myself." He was quiet for a moment. "Miss Dawson," he said, and turned just enough to meet her eyes. "This ranch has been needing someone like you for a long time. I just made sure nobody ran you off before we figured that out." He paused. "Don't thank me for that. That was just good sense." He walked out. Maggie stood in the kitchen and felt the full weight of the summer, all of it, the arrival and the pie and the cooperative and Whitmore and the midnight conversations, and the document with her name on it settle into something she could hold without being crushed by it. She put on her best dress at 5:30. She pinned her hair with care. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand, with the steady, clear gaze of a woman who has stopped looking for permission to take up space. She looked fine. Better than fine. She looked like herself fully and without apology. Ethan was waiting for her at the kitchen porch when she came out hat in hand, cleaned up and straight-backed, in the manner of a man who is doing something that matters and wants to do it properly. He looked at her, and something in his face went completely still for a moment. The particular stillness of being surprised by something you wanted so much, you had stopped letting yourself fully imagine it. "You look beautiful," he said. She did not deflect it. She did not minimize it. She let it land where he placed it because he meant it exactly as he said it, and she had spent too many years refusing gifts offered in good faith. "Thank you," she said. He offered his arm. She took it. And they walked out of Silver Creek Ranch together into the early evening toward a town that had been talking about them for weeks, toward whatever was waiting on the other side of being publicly, visibly, undeniably chosen. She held his arm and walked steadily, and thought, "I have been afraid of this my whole life." Not the town, not the talk, the choosing, the being chosen, the terrifying, necessary, life-altering act of allowing someone to stand beside you and say, "Here." This one. Her. She was not afraid anymore. She was, for the first time in 32 years, exactly where she was supposed to be. The morning after that Sunday conversation, everything was different, not in any way that a stranger would have noticed. The ranch ran the same. The hands ate breakfast at the same time, did the same work, said the same things they always said. Maggie was at the stove by 4:15, the way she always was. Ethan was in his study before dawn, the same light under the same door. But something had been set down, something that had been held at careful distance for weeks, managed, contained, kept behind the glass of professionalism and practicality, and all the reasonable things that reasonable people told themselves when they were afraid of what they actually wanted had been allowed to exist without apology. And once a thing exists without apology, it changes the air around it. You breathe differently. You move differently. You stop spending energy on the maintenance of a wall that no longer needs to stand. Ethan came to breakfast that morning instead of taking a plate at his desk. He sat at the end of the long table with the hands, and he ate, and he asked Curtis a question about the eastern fence line, and he listened to the answer. Ordinary. Unremarkable. Except that Curtis caught Maggie's eye across the room, with an expression that contained in a single look 8 years of hoping, and 2 months of watching, and the particular satisfaction of a man who has been loyal long enough to see the thing he was loyal to return to life. She looked away before either of them made more of it than it needed to be, but she felt it. She felt all of it. Whitmore did not disappear. Men like Whitmore never disappeared cleanly. They regrouped, They reassessed. They found new angles with the tireless ingenuity of people who have never once accepted the word no as a final answer. What he did in the weeks following the confrontation in the yard was quieter and more dangerous than anything he had tried before. He went to the bank. Maggie found out from Briggs, who found out from the bank clerk's brother-in-law, who worked at the mill and had loose enough lips to let the essential facts escape on a Tuesday afternoon without quite realizing he'd done it. The facts were, these Whitmore had had a conversation with the senior officer at the Millhaven Territorial Bank, a man named Archer, who owed Whitmore several favors of the financial variety about the credit arrangements of certain local ranchers, specifically about the notes and outstanding loans held against Silver Creek Ranch. How bad? Ethan asked when Briggs laid this out in the kitchen that evening. Briggs's jaw worked. The note on the East Pasture expansion comes due in October, he said. We've always been in good standing, never missed a payment. Archer's had no cause to do anything but renew it at standard terms. He paused. But if Whitmore leans on him, if Archer decides for whatever reason that the risk profile of Silver Creek has changed, he could call the note early, or refuse renewal. Ethan's face did not change. This was the thing about him that Maggie had come to understand when things were at their worst. His expression went the most still. Not because he was unaffected, but because he was concentrating the way a man concentrates when everything depends on his next decision being right. Can he do that? Maggie asked. Legally. The note has a provision, Briggs said reluctantly. It was standard at the time of signing. The bank can request accelerated repayment if they determine a material change in the borrower's risk circumstances. And what constitutes a material change? She asked. Anything they decide constitutes a material change, Briggs said. That's the trouble with that clause. It's broad. The kitchen was quiet. Ethan looked at Maggie. How much time do we have before Whitmore makes a move through Archer? He'll want it done before the cooperative agreement is formally filed, she said. Once that's registered, Silver Creek's financial position improves materially. It becomes harder to argue elevated risk. She thought quickly. When does the cooperative filing happen? Calloway said end of September, Briggs said. Then Whitmore moves before end of September, Maggie said, which means we have 5 to 6 weeks. Ethan looked at her steadily. Can we get ahead of it? She was already thinking. What's the outstanding balance on the East Pasture note? Briggs told her. She did the arithmetic in her head, running the numbers against what she knew of the ranch's current accounts, the cooperative cost-sharing arrangement, the operational savings she had engineered in the kitchen and the household over the past 3 months. She had been keeping accounts of everything. She had not known when she started that she was building a defense. But she had been building one anyway, the way her grandmother had always kept every record of every transaction, because a woman who cannot show her numbers is a woman who can be told any story about her own situation and made to believe it. If we pull forward to the fall cattle sale by 3 weeks, she said slowly, and apply the proceeds directly to the note, we can reduce the outstanding balance enough that accelerated repayment becomes significantly less threatening. Not impossible, but manageable. Ethan and Briggs both looked at her. The fall sale is traditionally mid-October, Briggs said. I know, Maggie said. Can it move to late September? Briggs thought. The cattle are ready, he said. It's early, but not wrong. The market in Cheyenne runs through September. Then we move it, Ethan said. Briggs nodded, stood, put his hat on, paused. Maggie, he said with the particular directness of a man who has made a decision about something. When this is all done, when Whitmore's finished and the cooperative's filed and the note is settled. He stopped, cleared his throat. I'd like you to know that in 30 years of working ranches across 3 territories, I have never once seen anybody, man or woman, think faster or straighter under pressure than you. He nodded once very firmly. That's all I wanted to say. He left before she could respond. She stood in the middle of the kitchen and let it settle over her. Ethan was looking at her. He doesn't say things like that, he said. I know, she said. He's said it to maybe 3 people in 30 years. She looked at the door Briggs had gone through. Then I'll take it seriously, she said. She sent a letter to Archer herself. Ethan didn't know she was going to do it. She wrote it on a Wednesday evening after the kitchen was clean, sitting at the work table with her good pen and her best paper. And she wrote it with the careful precision she brought to every document, clear, unambiguous, professionally framed, completely courteous in tone and absolute in content. She introduced herself as the household and operations manager of Silver Creek Ranch, a title she had not been formally given, but which was by this point an accurate description of what she actually was. She laid out in organized and well-supported terms the current financial position of the ranch, the water-sharing cooperative, and its projected impact on operational costs, the advance cattle sale and its expected proceeds, and the historical payment record of Silver Creek on all outstanding notes. She did not mention Whitmore. She did not need to. A letter that clearly and preemptively establishes the financial soundness of a borrower leaves very little room for an outside party to introduce doubt. She sealed it and gave it to Thomas to take to town with the morning supply run. She did not tell Ethan. She told him on Thursday evening when he came to the kitchen, and she set his coffee in front of him and said without preamble, "I sent a letter to Archer this morning." He went still. "I laid out Silver Creek's current financial position," she said. "Advance sale cooperative savings payment history. He doesn't need a reason to call that note early. I made sure he has no reason." A long pause. "You did that without telling me," he said. "I did it efficiently," she said. "If I'd told you first, you would have spent 2 days deciding whether it was appropriate for me to—" "It was absolutely appropriate," he said. "I know it was," she said. "That's why I didn't wait." He looked at her with an expression that she was starting to recognize as the one he wore specifically when she had done something that simultaneously surprised him and confirmed everything he already believed about her. "Maggie," he said. "Yes." He shook his head slowly. "Nothing," he said. "Just thank you." "Don't thank me," she said, returning his words from weeks ago back to him. "It's the truth. I just made sure somebody official heard it." The corner of his mouth moved. He picked up his coffee. "Archer's a careful man," he said. "A thorough letter from the operations manager will carry weight with him." "That's what I thought," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "You said operations manager," he said. "It's what I am," she said. Another pause. "It's not what I'm paying you," he said. "No," she agreed. "That needs to change," he said. "Yes," she said. "It does." He looked at her for a moment with the direct, uncomplicated gaze that was one of the things she had come to value most about him. No performance, no management. Just a man looking at a situation and seeing it clearly. "I'll have Briggs draw up a revised agreement," he said. "I already drafted one," she said. She pulled a folded paper from her apron pocket and set it on the table. He picked it up, read it again. "This is extremely fair," he said. "I know my worth," she said. "I haven't always been in a position to negotiate it, but I know it." He set the paper down. "Yes," he said. "You do." He met her eyes. "And so do I." Archer's response came back in 8 days. It was brief, professional, and entirely satisfactory. He acknowledged receipt of her communication, noted the strong payment history of Silver Creek Ranch, confirmed that the advance cattle sale proceeds would be applied to the East Pasture note upon receipt, and indicated that renewal at standard terms was anticipated in October. No mention of elevated risk. No mention of accelerated repayment. No cracks in the door for Whitmore to work his way through. Ethan read the letter twice and set it on the kitchen table and did not say anything for a full 30 seconds. Then he said, "It worked." "Of course it worked," Maggie said. "The position was sound. We just made sure it was visible." He looked up at her. "He's going to know," he said. "Whitmore. He'll hear from Archer that the approach failed, and he'll know it was you." "Let him know," she said. Ethan leaned back in his chair. The tension that had been sitting in his shoulders for weeks, she could see it leave him not all at once, but in a long, slow exhale, like a structure finally releasing the load it had been built to carry. "What does he do next?" Ethan asked. I don't know, she said honestly. But whatever he does next will have the cooperative filing behind us and the note addressed and 6 more weeks of demonstrated stability. He'll have less to work with each time. We're winning, Ethan said, slightly wondering. We're winning, she confirmed. He looked at her across the table with an expression that was simple and warm and did not try to be anything more than what it was. I want to take you to dinner, he said. In town, properly, this Saturday. Maggie was very still. People will talk, she said. Maggie. His voice was gentle, but it did not give any ground. People have been talking since your 2nd week here. The only thing taking you to dinner in town announces is that I am proud to be seen with you. That is a thing I would like people to know. She looked at him. She thought about Mrs. Fitch, about the feed store, about the church social, and the women who had turned their backs on a rancher's wife for the crime of eating supper next to the wrong person. She thought about all the ways the world had arranged itself to tell her she should not want things, should not expect things, should not appear in public places with men who had options. She thought about her grandmother, who had looked at a hard world every day of her life and found something in it worth making a pie for. Saturday, she said. Saturday, he confirmed. They went to the Millhaven dining room on Saturday evening, and it was exactly as public and exactly as unremarkable as Ethan had apparently intended it to be. He was known there. Of course he was known there. Ethan Callahan was known everywhere in a 30-mile radius. He walked in with Maggie at his side, and he greeted the man at the door by name, and he escorted her to a table by the window, and he pulled out her chair, and he did all of this with the particular ease of a man who has made a decision and is entirely comfortable with it. People looked. Of course they looked. Maggie felt every look. She had spent her life feeling looks, the quick assessments, the calibrations, the arithmetic that strangers performed on her body in the first 3 seconds of observation. She knew how to absorb them without letting them show on her face. She had developed this skill the way a person develops any survival skill through repetition, through necessity, through the stubborn daily choice to not let other people's failures of imagination become her limitations. She sat down. She picked up the menu. She looked across at Ethan. He was looking at her. Not at the room, not at the people looking at them, at her. The roasted chicken is good here, he said, or so Briggs tells me. I haven't eaten here in some years. Then we'll both be discovering it, she said. He smiled. A full one, the kind she had now seen enough times to know its particular quality, the way it started in his eyes before it reached his mouth, the way it had a warmth in it that was not performed. She picked the roasted chicken. He ordered the same. They ate and they talked, and the people around them looked and adjusted, and eventually, in the way of small towns, moved their attention to other things, because there was nothing to see except 2 people having dinner together in a thoroughly ordinary way. Except that it wasn't ordinary. It was the least ordinary thing that had happened to either of them in a very long time. Halfway through dinner, a woman at the next table leaned toward her companion and said something in a low voice that Maggie could not quite hear. She did not need to hear it. She knew the shape of it. Ethan heard it too. She could tell by the slight change in his posture. He did not look at the table next to them. He looked at Maggie. "Tell me about your grandmother's garden," he said. His voice was easy, deliberate, filling the space between them with something warm and specific. "You've mentioned the garden a few times. What did she grow?" Maggie understood what he was doing. She loved him a little for it in that moment. Quietly, without announcement. Just loved him. Everything, she said. She believed a garden should always have more in it than you strictly needed, because you never knew who was going to come to the gate hungry. He nodded slowly. That sounds like something she would have had in common with her granddaughter. She'd have liked you, Maggie said. She liked people who showed up and did the work without needing applause for it. I need applause occasionally, he said. No, you don't, she said. You just need to know it mattered. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. That's exactly right. Oh, The twist came on a Monday morning, and it came from a direction neither of them had seen. A rider arrived from Cheyenne before breakfast, a young man Maggie didn't recognize Dusty, and clearly having ridden through the night asking for Ethan Callahan by name. She sent him to the study and went back to the stove, but something about the quality of his arrival, the urgency, the hours ridden, the particular tightness around his eyes settled in her chest and would not leave. 30 minutes later, Ethan came into the kitchen. She turned to look at him. His face was very still. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She poured coffee and set it in front of him and waited. "It's about the cooperative filing," he said. "There's a legal challenge. Filed last week in the territorial court." She went still. "Whitmore." "Not Whitmore directly," Ethan said. "A water rights holding company. Registered in Denver 3 weeks ago." She looked at him. "A holding company that didn't exist before Whitmore needed it. Almost certainly." He picked up the coffee cup, set it down without drinking. "The challenge claims that the Eastern Creek Corridor falls under a pre-existing territorial water easement that predates any private cooperative arrangement. If the claim is valid, and my God, Maggie, it might be valid, it was a real easement from '71 that nobody paid attention to because there's never been enough water pressure in the corridor to make it relevant. If it's valid," she said steadily, "what does it mean for the cooperative?" "It means the cooperative has no legal standing to manage water distribution in that corridor," he said. "It means the holding company Whitmore's holding company has legal prior claim to determine access." The kitchen was very quiet. She absorbed this, all of it, the full weight. "He didn't try to buy it," she said slowly. "He didn't try to pressure it. He went looking for something that was already there, something that predates all of us." "Yes," Ethan said. "How long has he known about the easement?" "I don't know. Long enough to get a Denver attorney to file the challenge before we could file the cooperative registration." Maggie stood up. She walked to the window, not to look at anything, just to move, because she thought better when she was moving. She thought about the easement, about the timing, about Whitmore's pattern, which she had been studying for months, the way he never attacked directly when he could find a structural weakness, the way he used existing systems to do his damage, rather than creating the damage himself. And then something shifted in her thinking, something her grandmother had said once about recipes. When somebody tells you a dish can't be made. "Maggie girl, what they usually mean is they've been trying to make it wrong. Find the part they're getting wrong and you'll find the dish." "Who has the original easement documents?" she asked. "The territorial office in Cheyenne." "And the holding company's legal challenge, it references the 71 easement by registration number." "Yes." "Then we need the actual document," she said. "Not the reference. The document." Ethan looked at her. "Why? Because easements from 1871 were not standardized," she said. "The territorial office was disorganized. Boundaries were imprecise. Specific conditions and limitations were written differently from document to document." She turned to face him. "Whitmore found an easement. But what does the easement actually say? Does it cover the full corridor? Does it have conditions? Does it require active use to remain valid? Because an easement that hasn't been exercised in 15 years may have lapsed under territorial statute." Ethan stared at her. "I need someone to go to Cheyenne," she said. "Today, to the territorial office, to pull the actual document and read every word of it." "Maggie, send Thomas," she said. "He's fast and he's reliable, and he's smart enough to know what he's looking for if I tell him exactly what to ask for." She was already moving to the work table, already reaching for paper and pen. "I'll write him precise instructions. The registration number, what to ask for, what to look at, what to copy verbatim." "Maggie?" Ethan's voice was not stopping her. It was the voice of a man who is watching something and needs to say her name to make it real. "Do you understand what you're doing right now?" She paused, looked at him. "I'm doing what needs doing," she said. You're trying to find a hole in a legal challenge filed by a Denver attorney hired by the most connected man in this territory, he said, on the basis of a 15-year-old document you haven't seen. I know, she said, and you think you can find something he missed. She looked at him directly. I think people like Whitmore look for what they need and stop looking, she said. They find what confirms what they already want to do, and they call it done. They don't keep looking after they've found enough. She picked up the pen. I've been managing resources with too little margin for error my whole life. I don't stop looking. I look until I've seen everything because everything matters. She met his eyes. Yes, I think I can find something he missed. He was quiet for a long moment. Then find it, he said. She wrote the instructions for Thomas in 10 minutes, specific, precise, nothing wasted. Conditions of validity, active use requirements, boundary definitions, lapse clauses under territorial statute, 1874. She folded the paper, sealed it, and had it in Thomas's hands before breakfast was on the table. Thomas read it, looked up at her with his earnest, sunburned face, and said, I'll be back by Thursday, ma'am. Wednesday, she said. He straightened slightly. Wednesday, he said. He rode out before the sun was fully up. The 2 days that followed were the longest Maggie had spent at Silver Creek. She cooked. She managed the kitchen. She kept the accounts. She did every ordinary thing she did every ordinary day. And underneath all of it, she ran the problem through her mind the way she ran supply calculations from every angle, looking for the gap, looking for the place where the numbers didn't add up. Ethan stayed close to the ranch. He did not pace. He was not a pacing man, but she could feel his focus, the taut, concentrated quality of his attention during those 2 days. He checked in with her more than he usually did. Not because he needed anything, because proximity was what they had both learned to do when things were uncertain. On the second evenings after supper, she was at the work table going through the territorial statute. She had asked Briggs to locate in Ethan's legal files a copy slightly worn of the 1874 Consolidated Water Rights Act of Wyoming Territory, when Ethan came in and sat across from her. What are you looking for? He asked. Lapse clauses, she said. The 1874 Act amended prior easement registrations. If the 71 easement was a use-dependent grant, meaning it required active continuous use to remain valid, and there's been no documented exercise of the easement in the intervening years, it may have lapsed, he said. Under Section 14 of the 1874 Act, she said, and turned the statute to show him a use-dependent easement lapses after 10 years of non-exercise, unless renewed by application to the territorial registrar. She looked at him. Has anyone exercised water rights in that corridor under any easement claim since 1871? He was very still. Not that I've ever known, he said slowly. The corridor's always been low pressure. There's never been enough water to make formal rights claims practical. Then if the 71 easement was use-dependent, she said, it lapsed no later than 1881, 5 years ago. Ethan looked at her. Whitmore filed a challenge based on a lapsed easement, he said. Possibly, she said. Thomas needs to confirm the document language, but yes, possibly. If he's right, if the document shows use dependency, then the challenge fails, she said. The easement has no legal force. The cooperative has clear standing. Ethan pressed both hands flat on the table. He didn't know, he said. Or he gambled we wouldn't find it. He found an easement, confirmed it was real, and filed the challenge before anyone had time to read the fine print, she said. It's the same thing he did with the liability document. He uses real information to create false impressions. And this time he's done it to a territorial court, Ethan said. His voice was very controlled. If the easement is lapsed and he knows it, that's a question for a lawyer, she said. But the legal question is secondary right now. The primary question is whether the cooperative filing can proceed despite the challenge. My attorney in Cheyenne says we can file while the challenge is pending, Ethan said. The challenge would need to be resolved before the cooperative has full operational authority, but the filing can happen. Then we file immediately, she said. This week, before anything else moves. He looked at her for a long moment. "You have been 3 steps ahead of him at every turn," he said. "I've been watching him," she said. "That's all. When you watch someone carefully enough, their pattern becomes predictable." "What's his next move?" Ethan asked. Not skeptically, genuinely asking. She thought about it. "When the lapse argument holds, and I believe it will hold, he has nothing left that operates through the system," she said. "He's tried financial pressure, social pressure, legal challenge. When all of those fail publicly, a man like Whitmore is left with 2 options." She paused. "He accepts the situation and moves on. Or he does something that isn't careful anymore." The kitchen was quiet. "Which do you think he does?" Ethan asked. "I don't know him well enough to be certain," she said. "But men who have never lost before have a hard time accepting the first loss cleanly." She met his eyes. "Be ready." He held her gaze. "I'm ready," he said. Thomas came back on Wednesday evening as promised, his horse sweated, and his face road-worn, and his expression carrying the very specific look of a young man who has accomplished something significant and is trying not to show how proud he is. He came into the kitchen and reached into his coat and produced a folded sheaf of papers copied in his own handwriting, which was surprisingly clean for a ranch hand, and set them on the work table in front of Maggie. She opened them. She read the first page. She stopped. She read it again. "Thomas," she said. Her voice was very steady. "Ma'am." She looked up at him. "This is exactly what I needed." His face broke into the grin he had been suppressing. "The clerk at the registrar's office was real helpful once I explained what I was looking for," he said. "She even found me the 1874 renewal application records to show that the original grantor never filed for renewal." Maggie looked at the papers in her hand. The 71 easement was explicit, a use-dependent grant requiring active exercise and decennial renewal. No renewal had ever been filed. No exercise of the easement had ever been documented. The easement had lapsed in 1881. Whitmore had filed a challenge based on a legal instrument that no longer existed. She set the papers down. She pressed her hands flat on the table and breathed. Ethan came through the kitchen door. At that moment he had seen Thomas ride in from the yard, and he stopped when he saw her face. "It lapsed," she said. He came to the table. He looked at the papers. He read for 30 seconds. Then he straightened. He looked at Maggie. She looked at him. And in the kitchen of Silver Creek Ranch, on a Wednesday evening in late August, with Thomas standing near the door, grinning the grin of a young man who had ridden hard and done his job and was learning what it meant to be part of something worth fighting for. Ethan Callahan took Margaret Dawson's hand across the work table and held it. Just held it. He did not say anything grand. He did not make a speech. He was not that kind of man, and she was not that kind of woman, and the moment did not need anything added to it because it was already entirely complete. "We won," he said, quietly, like a man who has not said that word in a long time and is relearning the weight of it. "We won," she said, and Thomas, who was 19 years old and learning the world, looked at the two of them and then looked at the ceiling and then cleared his throat and said, I'll go put the horse up," and left with the dignity of someone who understands when a room needs to belong to the people in it. The door closed behind him. The kitchen held the warm, quiet weight of something that had been fought for and earned and was now finally real. Ethan's hand around hers was steady and warm and did not let go. She did not need it to.